A silver-haired man solemnly declares that his actions are entirely for Lois Lane's own good. Rejecting his claim, Lois Lane accuses him of merely wanting to lock her up and exploit her, though he quickly denies it. Sitting rigidly in an ornate chair, the young woman realizes she is nothing more than a decoration queen. The sprawling country of Libela stretches out beneath a bright, cloudy sky. Tucked away in the downtown area, a bustling street sits near the eastern wall. A rustic wooden sign swings gently, marking the entrance to a local restaurant. Inside the lively establishment, an employee urgently calls for Renee to take a dish to table 3. Eager to help, Renee cheerfully confirms she is on her way. A couple of patrons happily gossip about how lucky the Green Leaves restaurant is to have hired such a great worker like Renee. One of the customers reminisces nervously about how scary the owner used to be back when he simply watched the floor. Balancing a hot plate, the young waitress eagerly presents the house fish specialty to the waiting customers. Flashing a bright, bespectacled smile, she warmly tells them to enjoy their meal. Going by the name Renee, the cheerful girl reflects on her 2 months working at the Green Leaves restaurant. Though she was initially mocked as a country girl, she now proudly considers herself a beautiful employee. Interrupting her thoughts, Leguila-san tells her that she has done enough for the day and offers her something to eat. Taking a well-deserved break, Renee happily brings a spoonful of warm food to her mouth. Savoring the delicious bite, she closes her eyes in pure culinary bliss. As she eats, she overhears customers discussing how His Majesty recently welcomed a foreign queen and praising the chef's culinary skills. The patrons casually recall that the princess came from the small country of Rowan specifically to get married. One customer mentions that a palace guard friend claims the new queen is essentially a hikikomori who hides her face outside of public matters. Shocked by the rumor, Renee freezes in disbelief at hearing the queen described as a hikikomori. Sweating nervously, she internally dismisses the far-fetched gossip because she knows the queen is actually locked up in the imperial palace. In reality, the palace halls are heavily patrolled by guards under extreme surveillance. Standing strictly by the doors, the sentries ensure she cannot even leave for her own basic needs unless it is for official business. Breaking the fourth wall, the humble waitress asks if anyone is wondering how she knows all these royal secrets. Dropping her disguise, she reveals that it is simply because she is Princess Lois Lane. Gazing out over the city, she recalls how she traveled from Rowan half a year ago to get married. Entering the grand hall, her unexpected marriage proposal undoubtedly caused a massive uproar since she was merely the second princess of a small country. While the messenger proclaimed that His Highness Sieghard of the strong kingdom of Libela desired her, Lois Lane secretly suspected an ulterior motive despite her kingdom rejoicing over the undeniable opportunity. The political reality was that affiliating with Libela would help protect the peaceful lands of Rowan from unsafe neighboring countries. Steeling her resolve, she decided to embrace her feelings and take the risky chance. She knew her future husband, Sieghard of Libela, was reputed to be a strict but good king who was loved by his people. However, she was also keenly aware that he harbored a secret that could never be made public. While en route to her wedding, a younger Lois Lane overheard people questioning what His Highness planned to do with Mili-sama. Peering down from a balcony, she listened to Libela soldiers gossip that the king loved his mistress too much to give her up while she hid in the Garnet Palace. Wide-eyed with shock, Lois Lane learned that the king still visited his hidden lover every single night. Connecting the dots, she realized she had no real authority and had merely agreed to a marriage of convenience without any actual benefit. She understood that she was brought in solely because His Highness already possessed a lover who was unfortunately a common citizen. The king had fallen deeply in love with a woman known as Mile during secret meetings, but he was forced to abandon making her his queen after the royal family disapproved of adopting her into nobility. Because the royal family strictly honored lineage, Lois Lane was chosen as the perfect, unquestionable substitute. Upon her arrival, Sieghard and his retainers cordially welcomed her to Libela from the bottom of their hearts. Playing her part perfectly, Lois Lane thanked His Highness for the welcome and expressed her hope to serve him for a long time. Secretly sighing in relief, she admitted to herself that she already understood the entire situation and might have fallen in love with him otherwise. Knowing she lacked the political or military strength to complain, she accepted her role as a queen with a proper lineage who would quietly tolerate his mistress. Embracing her strange fate, she cheerfully decided she would act as his absolute shield while she was at it. A brilliant chandelier illuminated the tense atmosphere within the opulent palace. Stepping forward nervously, Sieghart attempted to offer Lois Lane a much-delayed explanation for his actions. Flashing a reassuring smile, Lois Lane told him not to worry because she already knew absolutely everything regarding his situation with Milisama. Completely blindsided by her calm admission, Sieghart and his aide could only stare at her in dumbfounded silence. Clasping her hands serenely, Lois Lane cheerfully declared that it was perfectly natural for them to have a strict marriage of convenience and promised to fully support his true love. Closing her eyes with a serene smile, Lois Lane asks Sieghart not to worry and instead be happy with Milisama. She solemnly reflects that this quiet acceptance is exactly how she became a decoration queen. Back at the Green Leaves restaurant, a co-worker praises Renee for a good job and tells her they will see her tomorrow. Citizens casually go about their day as a woman walks through a massive stone archway leading out of the town. Peeking carefully around a corner, Renee presses her hand against the stone wall to ensure nobody is watching. She confidently pushes open a glowing hidden doorway that reveals a secret set of stone stairs. A blinding explosion of magical light erupts from the hidden passageway. The grand, twin-spired architecture of the Lubela Royal Palace stands tall against the bright sky. Hearing a sudden noise, a maid named Emma turns around with a surprised look on her face. Stepping smoothly through an ornate mirror portal, Renee's shoes touch the polished palace floor. Arriving safely back in her room, she greets Emma and immediately asks if anything happened while she was gone. Emma calmly reassures her that there is nothing to worry about because everyone believes Her Highness spent the day enjoying her reading quietly without being disturbed. An illusion of Lois Lane sits peacefully on the sofa with an open book resting in her lap. Reaching out gently, Lois Lane places her hand over the chest of her magical double. A soft, sparkling magical shimmer surrounds her fingertips as she makes contact. Touching the projection, she undoes the magic and reveals a small, lifeless doll. Hugging the little doll closely to her chest, she warmly praises Jessie for doing a good job. Lois Lane compliments Emma's amazing magic, though the humble maid insists it is not extraordinary since she is entirely self-taught. Looking down at the doll, Emma wishes she had more powerful magic so her creation could easily move and reply. Holding Jessie up with a bright smile, Lois Lane calls the magic fantastic and thanks Emma for allowing her to safely visit the Green Leaves restaurant. While Emma exasperatedly sighs that it is unthinkable for a princess to be a waitress, Lois Lane cheerfully plans to thank her mother later because the experience has been incredibly beneficial. Lois Lane notes that her mother was respected as a queen in Rowan despite being a blessed witch and a former waitress, though Emma sharply reminds her that Rowan is a completely different country. The narrative explains that Emma, the loyal lady-in-waiting from Rowan, uses magic to create doll substitutes like Jessie during Lois Lane's secret absences. It is then revealed that the small country of Rowan possesses one very specific peculiarity. The nation is uniquely abundant in wizards, witches, and legendary individuals known as blessing holders. These blessing holders are people loved by the gods who possess a rare skill allowing them to use magic freely since birth without the typical essential practice. Because wizards are useful everywhere, Rowan easily formed alliances with several countries and prospered beautifully despite its small size. Lois Lane nostalgically recalls how her mother, born with the blessing of dispelling, married her father but secretly returned to her old workplace to help people suffering from curses and even taught Lois Lane the art of waitering. In a fond flashback, a young Lois Lane confidently serves the finest tea gifted from the Chancellor to a grateful guest. She sighs softly while reminiscing about the peaceful days of her past. Sipping her hot drink, Lois Lane admits she definitely would have gone crazy during her months of house arrest if she hadn't found a way to sneak out. Smiling warmly at her loyal friend, she expresses deep gratitude to Emma for enabling her to work freely. Emma playfully retorts that a withered image doesn't suit the princess even if her fighting spirit was dying from being locked up. The devoted maid explains that cooperating so her mistress can at least work is the absolute least she can do for her. Touched by the heartfelt sentiment, Lois Lane beams with genuine happiness. Changing the subject, Lois Lane asks if they are finished with official business and suggests the tired maid should rest since there are no notifications of any changes. Chuckling to herself, the princess decides to spend her morning reading and truly living up to her new title as a Hikikomori queen. Night finally falls over the grand exterior of the Lubela Royal Palace. Bidding everyone a polite farewell, Lois Lane wishes the head court lady and the rest of the staff a good night. The loyal maids bow respectfully on the floor as the princess officially dismisses them from her quarters. Once the room is empty, She solemnly notes that His Majesty won't be visiting her tonight either. She quickly jokes that she is used to it by now, though she wonders why he constantly sends notifications of his absence when it only keeps the busy head court lady needlessly occupied. Seeing Lois Lyne's sweat drop, Emma irritably snaps that it is all His Highness's concern and the princess shouldn't trouble herself over it. Lois Lyne accepts that he will likely never visit since he didn't even show up on their wedding night, but she insists she isn't lonely because a certain partner sleeps with her. Complete silence fills the ornate room as the two women patiently wait by the mirror. Emma asks if the mysterious visitor will come tonight, and Lois Lyne confidently confirms she will, since she has been arriving every single night lately. Small, quiet footsteps tap against the floor as the mirror portal softly opens on its own. A pair of tiny, silent animal paws steps cautiously into the glowing light. Lois Lyne joyfully calls out her little companion's name. Embracing a chubby rabbit, the happy princess welcomes Yuchan and admits she has been eagerly waiting for her. Cuddling a small bunny, Lois Lyne gently rubbed its soft head. Whispering to Renesama that her earlier tension has completely vanished, an unseen caretaker marvels at her enduring, comforting softness. Reassuring her that no one is around to witness this private, vulnerable moment, the caretaker quietly wonders aloud why she is so incredibly cute. The young woman plants a tender, sparkling kiss on her beloved companion, affectionately calling out to Yuchan. Every single night at bedtime, this lovely rabbit named Yuchan faithfully arrives to be her comforting bedmate. Initially surprised by the creature, the woman credits her bunny savior for revealing a secret passage that she now uses to sneak out of her quarters. Observing the remarkably pristine condition of the rabbit's coat, she realizes Yuchan definitely has a dedicated caretaker. She concludes with absolute certainty that the little rabbit is belovedly kept as someone's cherished pet. Recognizing that the hidden route likely winds anywhere through the royal palace, she guesses it ultimately leads straight to the caretaker's quarters. Lifting the bunny high, she laments that asking the owner for Yuchan is impossible because it would require exposing the illicit secret passage. Resigning herself to the complicated situation, she accepts that they must remain patient and simply continue sleeping together as they always have. Confined to the dreary role of a mere decoration queen, she admits to feeling profound initial worry about her bleak, unfulfilling future. Finding incredible solace alongside her important friend Yuchan, she rejoices in finally having a place to truly be herself at the Green Leaves restaurant. While her maid bids Renema to sleep well, the queen confidently reassures herself that she can manage everything just fine now. Nestled comfortably beside her soft companion, she firmly and contentedly declares that she absolutely does not need a husband. Drifting into a peaceful slumber, she finds complete emotional fulfillment because she already has Yuchan by her side. Bright morning sunlight dramatically floods through the grand, towering windows of the sprawling royal palace. Stirring from her deep rest, Lois Lyne is gently roused by a mysterious, echoing voice addressing her as Your Highness. Caught in what is definitely a dream, she envisions a sorrowful man apologizing to Lois Lyne while she insists such a desperate encounter is impossible. Acknowledging her grim reality even in sleep, she bitterly reminds herself that she is nothing more than a powerless decoration queen. The dawn breaks gracefully over the palace estate after a deeply mysterious night of sleep. Waking up with a wide yawn, she notices Yuchan is already gone and wistfully wishes the bunny wouldn't always leave before morning. Embracing her brilliant double life, she secretly thrives as a hardworking waitress by day while enduring her role as a decorative, bunny-loving queen by night. A sharp, sudden knock interrupts the morning quiet as an attendant requests permission to enter the royal bedchamber. A line of perfectly poised maids enters the room, respectfully wishing Her Majesty a good morning to officially begin the daily routine. Immediately after waking up, the maids excitedly present an extravagant gown and eagerly ask for her opinion on the day's opulent attire. Forcing a polite smile and calling it beautiful, she inwardly dreads the impending burden of changing into the constricted, agonizingly heavy dress. Stepping gracefully into the grand hall, Lois Lyne formally greets King Sieghard and offers a highly polite apology for her tardiness. Sieghard casually apologizes for his absence the previous night, but Lois Lyne quickly dismisses the issue and thanks him for his hollow concern. Reflecting on their entirely predictable, stagnant dynamic, she internally laments that their conversations have always been exactly the same. Lacking any face-to-face meetings outside of public affairs, the royal couple relies entirely on their rigid promise to spend their mornings dining together. Upholding a strict custom established since the beginning of their marriage, His Majesty travels all the way from the main shrine to her detached palace just for breakfast. Frustrated by the troublesome gowns required for these daily meetings, she desperately wishes she were back in Rowan where she could wear a simple chemise dress instead. Stealing a subtle, weary glance across the long table, she bitterly wonders how much longer they will drag out this utterly meaningless routine. Staring down at her exquisitely plated but completely cold meal, she notes that the mandatory poison tasting ruins the otherwise delicious food. Breaking the tense silence, Sieghard carefully asks Lois Lane how she managed to spend her day yesterday, masking her true activities with a flawless, polite smile. She claims she merely read books and playfully apologizes for being so laid back. Reassuring her that there is absolutely no need to worry, Sieghard kindly encourages her to continue spending her days leisurely. Studying his exceptionally beautiful and well-kept face, Lois Lane observes that, as usual, her husband completely fails to express any genuine emotions. Suddenly slicing through the awkward domestic tension, a distinguished advisor formally excuses himself as he approaches the royal couple. Announcing that the audience is fully ready, the advisor interjects to briefly run through pressing public affairs before they proceed. Curtis Arlone, the fiercely powerful chancellor and head of the Arlone family, hides his ruthless habit of crushing all opposition behind an elegantly gentle smile. Seething with internal rage at the black-hearted chancellor, Lois Lane deeply regrets being deceived by his appearance and foolishly trusting him with far too much information. A sweeping flashback to a sunlit memory reveals that her fateful first encounter with Sieghard and Curtis occurred exactly 6 years ago. While traveling to the eastern countries on behalf of his father, the young Crown Prince Sieghard was closely escorted by a vigilant Curtis. Chosen by pure chance to be their official guide through Rowan's royal palace, she fell victim to Curtis, who mercilessly used his innocent appearance to lead her on. Manipulated by his false charm, the vulnerable young guide tragically ended up spilling her deepest, darkest secret: her complete inability to use magic. Unlike her magically gifted parents and deeply blessed siblings from the wizard-producing homeland of Rowan, she alone was born completely devoid of both magic and blessings. Although her devoted family loved her fiercely despite her magical incapabilities, she remained painfully aware that many of their vassals harbored deep disappointment in her. Realizing they elected her as queen simply because a supposedly useless princess couldn't refuse a chance to be helpful, she furiously curses the black-hearted chancellor for his calculated manipulation. Lois Lane resolves to play the perfect decoration queen and use His Majesty just as he uses her, planning to secure the best conditions for her homeland of Rowan before their inevitable breakup gives her a reason to return. For the time being, she simply sits quietly, wearing a pleasant smile as she plays the part of a well-behaved queen. As the official briefing concludes, she dutifully acknowledges the report that all public affairs for the day have been handled. Dismissing himself from the room, Sieghard instructs her to join the audience whenever she is ready, which she formally accepts. Left alone with her thoughts, a flicker of emotion flashes through her wide, observant eyes. Watching him leave, she recalls that during their first meeting 6 years ago he at least smiled, contrasting sharply with the cold ice statue he has become today. She inwardly wonders what tragic events must have happened to him after his return from the eastern countries to cause such a drastic change. Heavy doors creak open as an attendant cheerfully announces that it is time to head to the Queen's audience. Stepping into the corridor, she finds herself overwhelmingly cramped by a massive, stifling wall of royal guards and attendants. Forcing a strained smile through the claustrophobia, she silently fumes over how utterly excessive it is for a queen to have a larger escort than the king himself. She acknowledges that while this suffocating detail might be for her protection, it completely ruins her chances of making a good first impression. Her heels click-clack against the floor as she continues to puzzle over why her residence was suddenly relocated from the main shrine to the remote royal villa. Pausing in her tracks, a sudden realization momentarily breaks her stoic, royal composure. Arriving at the audience chamber, she is warmly greeted by Earl Arkance, who enthusiastically notes how long it has been since they last met. The Earl expresses his profound relief at seeing her healthy, explaining that Chancellor Curtis had deeply concerned him by claiming Her Majesty wasn't feeling fit. Maintaining a pleasant facade with a soft sigh, she internally screams in absolute fury that the evil Chancellor had spread such a manipulative lie. She fondly remembers the Earl from her time before marriage, back when he served as an esteemed ambassador of Lubela at Rowan's palace. Apologizing for causing him any worry, she cherishes the Earl as the only noble who was kind enough to welcome her rather than look down on her arrival. She diplomatically waves off his concerns by attributing her exhaustion to the new changes, gracefully pivoting to praise His Majesty for shouldering so much public business. Clasping her hands over her heart, she offers a radiant, reassuring smile and declares that the king truly is a kind person. The loyal earl proudly agrees that the king is their nation's absolute pride, to which she nods in polite agreement. Despite her outward praises of his leadership, she bitterly concludes in her own mind that Sieghard is a truly awful husband. The brief reunion is abruptly cut short when a servant formally announces that Her Majesty must proceed. An aide leans in to respectfully remind the earl that the scheduled meeting is just about to commence. As she turns to leave alongside her maids, she apologizes for delaying him, though the earl insists that merely seeing her healthy has entirely soothed his fretting. He firmly states he could never face the King of Rohan if any harm befell her, a dramatic loyalty she humbly brushes off as an exaggeration. Bowing with genuine sincerity, Earl Arkance vows that she only needs to ask if there is ever anything he can do to assist her. Touched by his unwavering support amidst a court of vipers, she gives him a brilliant smile and warmly thanks him. Sunlight pours through the grand, elegantly draped windows of the palace as the day's formal duties finally draw to a close. Collapsing onto a plush sofa with a heavy sigh of relief, she happily celebrates that everything went smoothly. When her maid suggests getting some rest, Lois Lane easily dismisses the concern, noting she is perfectly fine since her only job was to stand beside the prince and smile. Her loyal maid expresses deep concern over the Queen's severe lack of social interaction, accurately pointing out that Chancellor Curtis intentionally isolates her by only allowing indispensable meetings. Staring thoughtfully at the ornate furniture, she calmly processes this calculated isolation with a simple note of understanding. Rather than feeling trapped, a sly grin spreads across her face as she realizes this extreme isolation is exactly what allows her to secretly work. Eager to begin her true life, she cheerfully thanks her maid as the servant brings out her humble, everyday clothes. She instructs her maid to cover for her by claiming she is exhausted and resting in bed, asking her to quickly prepare Jessie while she strips off her royal disguise. With a rustle of fabric, she expertly sheds the heavy royal gown and slips into her civilian attire, finalizing the transformation by putting on a pair of glasses. Now comfortably dressed in a modest gown with her hair neatly braided, she confidently declares that she is ready. Fully embracing her alternate persona, she smiles brightly and relies on her dependable maid to hold down the fort. Her seamless transition from the dazzling, untouchable decoration queen to an ordinary, approachable town girl is nothing short of flawless. Leaving the royal charade entirely in Emma's capable hands, she nods in agreement as the maid urges her to be extremely careful. Gripping a glowing lantern, she cheerfully bids her farewell and promises to be cautious as she clicks the hidden door open. The heavy stone passageway swallows her whole as she bravely steps out into the damp, completely unlit tunnel. Navigating the pitch-black labyrinth, she routinely encounters dark, confusing crossroads that could easily trap an intruder. With steady, practiced steps, she descends deeper into the ancient, winding staircases hidden beneath the palace. Although her tiny lantern barely illuminates her own feet, she moves without a shred of fear thanks to her highly unique special skill. Behind the gleaming lenses of her simple glasses, she closes her eyes to tap into her innate, guiding power. Opening her eyes with absolute certainty, she proudly reveals that her special ability ensures she can always choose the correct path. Whenever faced with a complex maze of choices, her extraordinary instinct flawlessly guides her to the absolute best results. Empowered by this incredible navigational blessing, she confidently advances toward her secret destination without ever taking a single wrong turn. 2 months ago, long before her days of serving tables at Green Leaves, Renee took a somber moment to deeply reflect on her incredibly sheltered and restrictive past. Utilizing a secret, hidden stone tunnel that miraculously connected directly to the bustling royal capital, she eagerly managed to sneak out of the palace to explore and have fun. However, her completely carefree adventure abruptly shattered when a terrifying, undeniable feeling washed over her that a shadowy figure was closely following her every move. Panicking uncontrollably over whether her unseen pursuer was a violent mugger or a sneaky thief, she desperately scanned the unfamiliar cobblestone streets for a safe place to hide. Bursting violently through the heavy wooden doors of a nearby establishment, her sudden, frantic, and desperate arrival completely startled the hardworking restaurant staff inside. Quickly noticing her dangerously pale complexion and violently trembling form, the concerned head waitress immediately stopped her chores to ask what was going on. Trembling with sheer, paralyzing terror, Renee stammered out a frantic, breathless explanation that she was actively being followed by an unknown, dangerous assailant. The kind, maternal woman quickly and softly reassured the frightened girl that any petty thief would have given up by now, gently urging her to sit down and rest her weary legs. To her utter shock and overwhelming relief, the deeply compassionate staff mercifully placed a steaming, incredibly fragrant bowl of hot soup right in front of her. Still paralyzed by lingering fear, she listened in total disbelief as the generous woman warmly insisted she eat and warm up without ever worrying about paying a single coin. Stuttering with an overwhelming amount of profound, heartfelt gratitude, the exhausted girl humbly thanked her kind-hearted saviors for the incredibly comforting meal. Taking her very first hesitant bite of the warm broth, she was instantly and utterly overwhelmed by how absolutely delicious and deeply restorative the simple food tasted. Heavy, unstoppable tears of profound relief and unadulterated joy welled up in her eyes as the comforting, magical warmth rapidly spread through her shivering body. Watching the incredibly hard-working staff hustle around the busy, chaotic restaurant, an intense, burning desire to completely repay their extraordinary kindness took root in her heart. Suddenly springing to her feet with explosive, undeniable energy, she completely startled the head waitress by loudly and passionately volunteering to help them work. Renee confidently puffed out her chest, proudly and loudly assuring them that she possessed plenty of table-serving experience and could easily handle the grueling job. Her newfound, fiery determination was immediately and aggressively challenged by the profoundly intimidating sight of a towering, massive mountain of dirty dishes left behind by the patrons. After diligently and thoroughly scrubbing the endless plates, she humbly explained she just wanted to repay them, prompting the deeply impressed woman to praise her intense hard work. Genuinely impressed by her sudden and highly effective assistance, the older woman generously offered her an official opportunity to work during their most chaotic rush hours. Caught completely off guard by the unexpectedly generous and life-changing job offer, Renee simply blinked in stunned, wide-eyed, and silent disbelief. A soft, incredibly genuine and beautiful smile slowly graced her elegant features as the amazing, liberating reality of this newfound independence finally sank in. Beaming with an absolutely radiant, uncontainable, and explosive joy, she eagerly and loudly accepted the exciting new waitress position without a second thought. Clasping her small hands together in earnest, desperate enthusiasm, she formally and passionately pleaded to the woman to be officially allowed to work there. Later that very same day, a regular customer securely escorted her back near the tunnel so she could return to the palace, where she was immediately met by a furiously angry Emma. Although fiercely and loudly against the dangerous idea of her working at Green Leaves at first, Emma ultimately surrendered after finally understanding the deep, crushing sadness buried in Renee's heart. Working the bustling, chaotic floors at the lively restaurant allowed her to permanently shed her heavy shackles as queen, truly freeing her to be her totally authentic self. Clenching her fists with sheer, unstoppable, and fiery motivation, she triumphantly celebrated the incredibly joyful reality of officially earning her very own hard-fought salary. Walking briskly back through the damp, secret stone passages, an overwhelming, powerful sense of true happiness about working at Green Leaves flooded her entire soul. Stepping confidently and beautifully out of the hidden alleyway in her perfectly neat uniform, she mentally prepared herself to face another wonderfully chaotic day of honest labor. Pushing the heavy wooden door open with a loud, echoing creak, she cheerfully and loudly greeted Ligulia and Kitsu with a remarkably bright afternoon welcome. Ligulia immediately beamed back brightly at the young girl, aggressively calling her over to dive headfirst into the chaotic lunch shift and help the swamp team. Expertly and gracefully weaving her way through the deafeningly loud chattering crowds and clinking dishes, Renee enthusiastically answered urgent, demanding orders for Table 3 and Table 1. Balancing the heavy, stacked porcelain plates with practiced, graceful ease, she smugly concluded to herself that she was undeniably much better at being a waitress than a royal. Bowing politely and deeply to the thoroughly satisfied departing patrons, she warmly thanked them for their business and enthusiastically invited them to come again soon. As the heavy front door finally clicked closed on the brutal lunch rush, she sighed heavily, feeling utterly exhausted but wonderfully fulfilled by another uniquely challenging day. Despite the grueling, physically demanding and tiring nature of the restaurant business, the undeniable sense of pure, hard-earned accomplishment filled her with incredible pride. Ligulia kindly and softly instructed her to flip the front sign to closed since the very last customers were finally leaving, a simple task Renee eagerly accepted. Just as she hummed a happy little tune and reached out to eagerly flip the open sign, the front door violently burst open with a panicked, breathless, and startling shout. A frantic, heavily panting, and distressed man crashed into the wooden entryway, desperately begging to know if he was still miraculously on time to grab some lunch. The completely unexpected and dramatic arrival served as a wild twist, bringing her face to face with a handsome, imposing military man who dared to defy their strict closing schedule. Instantly recognizing the frantic, breathless customer, Renee broke into a surprisingly warm, familiar smile and enthusiastically welcomed Kane inside the establishment. Desperately catching his breath, the remarkably handsome, dark-haired soldier locked his exhausted eyes with hers and offered a soft, deeply relieved, and genuine greeting. Incredibly relieved that he had made it just in the absolute nick of time, Ligulia cheerfully ordered him to sit down and relax while they quickly prepared a hearty meal. Chuckling lightly at his sheer panic, Renee teased that Ligulia would have mercifully fed him anyway, prompting Kane to bashfully admit he had desperately rushed to get there. Gazing up at her with a remarkably gentle, deeply appreciative and warm smile, the hardened soldier softly thanked Renee for her consistently wonderful hospitality. Renee silently and thoughtfully reflected on Kane Lubeck, recognizing him as a fiercely dedicated soldier and an incredibly loyal regular who frequented Greenleaf's 3 times every single week. She fondly and vividly recalled that Kane was actually the very same person who had safely and graciously escorted her back to the tunnel's hidden entrance after her chaotic first day. Downing his ice-cold, perfectly refreshing drink with a highly satisfied sigh, the weary, battle-hardened soldier completely and utterly emptied his glass in mere seconds. Leaning in with an intense expression of genuine, protective concern, Kane suddenly asked Renee if anyone else had been creeping around or dangerously following her since that scary incident. Flashing a bright, thoroughly reassuring and confident smile, she promised him that the terrifying, traumatic stalking incident had only ever happened that one single time. Flashing a bright, genuine smile, Renee warmly thanked Kane for his unwavering support. Although she thankfully hadn't experienced any more frightening incidents since that fateful day, the dedicated soldier continued to frequently check up on her. Calling out to him cheerfully, she admired his enduring kindness and the warm, constant smile that always graced his handsome face. She silently reflected on how his remarkably warm and approachable demeanor was a complete and utter contrast to the cold, distant nature of His Majesty. While fully understanding their vastly different social statuses, she couldn't help but notice that Kane actually displayed genuine emotion, unlike the king who constantly ignored her warm smiles. Snapping back to her bustling waitress duties, she cheerfully presented him with a massive, steaming plate of delicious food he had been eagerly waiting for. Suddenly remembering his earlier instructions, the soldier sheepishly apologized for forgetting to remind her to finally flip the open sign. Later that afternoon, the pair calmly strolled together through the beautiful, sprawling cobblestone streets of the bustling capital city. Walking closely beside him, Renee apologetically thanked him for escorting her home again, to which he smoothly assured her he had to return to the nearby military station anyway. Offering a sweet, encouraging parting message for his continued hard work, she received a warm, deeply appreciative nod of thanks from the rugged soldier. Watching his retreating back, a sudden wave of genuine curiosity washed over her as she realized she didn't actually know where his specific military station was located. She thoughtfully pondered her complete lack of knowledge regarding his personal life, silently regretting never asking him about his actual duties. Shifting the pleasant conversation, Kane smoothly asked if she had finally adjusted to the massive capital city, which she enthusiastically confirmed. She brightly explained that while the completely foreign surroundings still surprised her daily, the incredible kindness of the city's locals had immensely helped her settle in. Instantly blushing with intense, burning embarrassment, she frantically realized her highly enthusiastic explanation completely exposed her incredibly naive, country bumpkin nature. Chuckling softly at her adorable panic, the observant soldier warmly noted that it made perfect sense since she originally hailed from the distant land of Rowan. Their peaceful, light-hearted conversation was suddenly and powerfully interrupted by the massive, booming chime of a colossal, echoing bell ringing through the sky. Looking up at the clear sky, Kane gently explained the massive sound originated from the Familia Temple, a deeply familiar chime that constantly echoed throughout the busy streets. Pointing toward the distant skyline, the knowledgeable soldier described the massive, globally worshipped sacred temple dedicated entirely to Familia, the legendary goddess of the earth. Gazing at the colossal, intricate spires, She quietly noted that her own grand royal marriage to His Majesty was actually held within those very walls. Leaning in with a sudden, serious tone, Cain utterly shocked the naive girl by quietly revealing the hidden existence of deeply secretive temples dedicated to the forbidden gods of night. Delving deeply into the ancient, mythological history, he explained that long after the original world's violent creation, the ancient gods had fallen into a deep slumber to allow new deities to rise. He respectfully described how the beloved Familia emerged as the absolute, shining representative of these newly awakened gods, working tirelessly to protect and peacefully preserve the earth. However, a dark, terrifying fraction of those ancient deities, known as the gods of night, stubbornly refused their eternal slumber and violently clung to their oppressive rule. To brutally end their reign, Familia forcefully banished the dark gods into a permanent sleep, sparking an eternal, venomous grudge that still continuously cursed humanity. Pausing his heavy, ominous tale, the soldier gravely warned that while their dark temples were mostly ruins, several dangerous, corrupted sites still ominously remained just outside the eastern gate. Staring intently into her wide, fearful eyes, he strictly forbade her from ever approaching the ruined area, citing the incredibly fierce, deadly beasts that violently prowled the cursed grounds. Lowering his voice into a deadly, serious whisper, he grimly revealed that those exact cursed ruins were the site of a truly terrible, infamous incident caused by the violent Cruz faction. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly crashed down upon the bustling cobblestone street as the dark, terrifying name of the extremist faction hung ominously in the cool air. The bright, cheerful atmosphere of their pleasant afternoon walk completely dissolved into an overwhelming, deeply oppressive tension as she processed his chilling words. Her small, delicate footsteps echoed loudly against the stone pavement as a deep, terrifying sense of dread slowly crept into her freezing heart. Accidentally splashing heavily into a shallow puddle, the sudden, jarring noise violently snapped her out of her incredibly dark, spiraling thoughts. Trembling slightly in the cool breeze, the deeply cursed name of the Cruz faction echoed endlessly and terrifyingly within the confines of her anxious mind. She vividly and horrifyingly recalled that the violently dangerous group's terrifying reputation was widely feared and furiously discussed even back in her peaceful homeland of Labela. Plagued by absolute fanaticism, the terrifying Cruz faction aggressively operated under a violently distorted, incredibly dangerous set of radical religious beliefs. Their insanely twisted, unforgiving doctrine violently dictated that humanity's use of miraculous gifts was an absolute sin, demanding all divine power be brutally returned to their God. Driven by this fanatical madness, they mercilessly and violently slaughtered countless innocent witches, magicians, and beloved saints under the horrific, bloody guise of divine dedication. Because her magically gifted homeland produced many powerful sorcerers, the Cruz faction naturally despised them, placing a massive, terrifying target on her beloved older sister Linderone, a revered fertility saint. Tragically cursed by her own divine, miraculous gifts, Linderone suffered through numerous horrific kidnappings orchestrated by both the violent faction and incredibly greedy rival nations. In incredibly stark, bitter contrast, Renee silently acknowledged that her completely ordinary, giftless nature was the sole, pathetic reason she had never been violently abducted. A deep, agonizing wave of horrific self-doubt crushed her spirit as she painfully wondered if possessing a magical gift would have finally erased her awful title as the useless princess. Standing completely alone in the freezing, pitch-black stone tunnel, a profound, suffocating silence violently swallowed the deeply troubled young royal, exhaling a heavy, incredibly shaky sigh. She desperately tried to clear her swimming mind of the traumatic, haunting memories aggressively triggered by the faction's terrifying name. Despite her deep, lingering insecurities, she logically and painfully recognized that wielding incredible, divine power absolutely did not guarantee a peaceful or happy life. Shivering in the damp cold, she horrifyingly remembered the constant, paralyzing terror of never knowing if a single, tiny mistake would violently cost her beloved older sister her life. Breaking into a frantic, desperate sprint down the dark corridor, she aggressively forced herself to completely outrun the suffocating, incredibly dark thoughts threatening to consume her mind. Pushing her exhausted legs to their absolute limit, her only desperate, frantic thought was to urgently escape the tunnel and safely reunite with Emma. A sudden, incredibly loud and piercing bird chirp aggressively sliced through the tense, heavy silence, violently startling the highly anxious, running princess. Bursting frantically out of the pitch-black stone passage, She suddenly stumbled into a blindingly bright, magnificent space and gasped in absolute, bewildered shock. Blinking aggressively against the sudden, glorious sunlight, her incredibly wide, stunned eyes slowly took in the breathtaking, massive beauty of the sprawling, highly immaculate royal courtyard. Beside a tranquil stone fountain, two small birds flutter playfully through the serene palace courtyard. Realizing with a start that she wasn't paying attention to her path, a young woman with round glasses and thick braided hair suddenly wonders where she has wandered off to. Glancing nervously around the unfamiliar courtyard, she calculates that she must still be somewhere within the royal palace grounds, possibly lingering near the main shrine. Suddenly, a sharp gasp of terrifying realization escapes her lips. Panic setting in rapidly, she knows she has to go back immediately, terrified that it will be a major problem if anyone catches sight of her wandering out of bounds. Her wide eye trembles behind her spectacles as the true gravity of her mistaken detour sets in without warning. Spinning around with frantic energy, she prepares to make a desperate, hasty retreat from the forbidden sector of the estate. Her frantic footsteps echo loudly as she sprints headlong down a long, shadowy hallway adorned with stark checkered flooring. With her braided hair whipping violently behind her in her desperate flight, dread consumes her as she fears she isn't going to make it out in time. Slamming her body against a sturdy stone pillar, she scrambles to hide herself in the deep shadows next to an abandoned floor lantern. Trembling as she presses against the cold stone, she peeks out nervously to see if anyone spotted her reckless dash through the corridor. Her stomach drops as the heavy, approaching sound of footsteps alerts her that someone is heading directly her way. The sharp, authoritative click of formal leather shoes against the stone floor grows agonizingly close as a mysterious figure steps into the corridor. A sharply dressed man materializes from the gloom, his voice slicing through the thick tension as he asks if that was her running past. Another unseen figure humbly apologizes for their strategy failing, prompting the first man to coldly demand a full report of the morning's disastrous events. Letting out a quiet sigh of relief, the hiding girl thanks goodness that the two dangerous men remain completely oblivious to her hidden presence nearby. Her fleeting relief instantly evaporates as a chilling realization dawns upon her. She recognizes the distinct voices echoing through the hall. Hoping to deduce her unknown location within the labyrinthine palace, she bravely resolves to identify the secret speakers hiding in the dark. One of the men complains about the troublesome dimensional barrier within the royal palace, revealing he sent a diversionary agent to conceal their true, sinister plot. The dark report continues, detailing how their distraction was instantly perceived and arrested by a vigilant wizard belonging to the royal palace. Furious at the utter failure of their operation, a fist violently slams down as the speaker aggressively curses the queen's damn watchdogs. Frozen stiff in her hiding spot, the eavesdropping girl is entirely thrown off guard upon hearing the shocking, unexpected mention of the queen. The conspirators coldly discuss how the captured assassin is currently being questioned by soldiers, while boasting that the troublesome wizard has already been permanently taken care of. As the men arrogantly guarantee that their criminal tracks will never be uncovered, the eavesdropper wonders in absolute, paralyzed terror if they are actually plotting against her, the queen. Unable to fully comprehend the dark nature of this meeting, she listens as they pledge to do whatever it takes to fulfill their master's twisted wishes. A violent, freezing shiver runs down her spine as the conspirator unequivocally declares that the queen must be killed. An unexpected, creeping darkness begins rising up from the labyrinthine bottom of the earth as the sinister reality of the assassination plot fully settles into the narrative. Safely back in her private chambers, a frantic maid shrieks in absolute disbelief, demanding to know if there was truly an attempt to take Queen Renee's life. Desperately seeking a sliver of reassurance, the trembling maid asks if her mistress is entirely sure about the horrifying things she just heard. Renee confirms the grim truth with the utmost certainty, stating she clearly overheard the group and their malicious leader actively plotting that the queen must be killed. Swallowing her rising panic to maintain order, the deeply unsettled maid instructs them both that they must remain as calm as possible. Her hands trembling violently with unresolved fear, the faithful maid offers to pour her targeted queen a soothing cup of hot tea. Renee sits in heavy, contemplative silence, the terrifying weight of the looming assassination attempt casting a dark shadow over her young features. Analyzing the suspicious, quiet cover-up, Renee points out that one of the hostile men was apprehended, yet absolutely no word of it has reached their isolated ears. The maid firmly agrees, noting that if there had been any true commotion, the palace workers wouldn't be carrying on as usual without a massive public uproar. Renee reflects on the disturbing timeline, recalling the men discussing a morning plan that was executed while she and her staff were still soundly asleep at the first light of dawn. Having always naively believed her excessive protection was unnecessary, Queen Renee now understands that her mere title makes her a highly valuable target for assassination. Outraged by the sheer audacity of putting such a vile plot into practice, the loyal maid fiercely demands that these treacherous men be arrested as soon as possible. The maid concludes with terrifying logic that since the conspirators are already planning their next move, they will undoubtedly try another attempt to take Renee's life. Pleading for immediate royal intervention, the maid urgently suggests discussing this dire matter with His Majesty the very next morning. Renee abruptly rejects the idea, arguing that while it might boost the palace defenses, His Majesty must surely already know about the hired assassin by now. Clutching her chest in dismay, she realizes it would be a complete disaster if investigators started asking how she learned of the incident while supposedly locked securely in the palace. Revealing her secret would mean explaining her hidden tunnel and her illicit shifts working at the village restaurant, inevitably causing severe trouble for the innocent workers. Adding to her suffocating paranoia, she deduces that the true mastermind orchestrating the hit could very well be someone incredibly close to His Majesty. She speculates that a high-ranking aristocrat might be trying to get rid of her to crown his own daughter, noting that such a traitor would have to actively oppose both her and Rowan. Reporting the plot might leak the intelligence straight to her enemies, and exposing her secret tunnel would allow anyone free entry into the palace, putting her in infinitely more danger. The grim reality finally settling in, the maid agrees that trusting anyone is impossible, pointing out that Chancellor Curtis is just as dangerous as the rest. Clenching her hands together with fierce determination, Renee vows that she absolutely mustn't say anything to that black-hearted chancellor. Knowing that she is completely on her own, she accepts the terrifying truth that she must protect herself, as she cannot safely talk to anyone about these vital clues. A sudden, sharp gasp escapes her lips as the crushing isolation of her royal imprisonment finally takes its agonizing toll. Renee resolves that while she can't act as the Decoration Queen, she can use her freedom as Renee to search for the criminals' true identities. A frantic maid scolds her mistress, warning that despite the strict palace protection, they would be helpless if anything dangerous happened outside. Confidently asserting her luck, Renee assures her maid that she swore an oath to the goddess to avoid dangerous stunts. Renee stubbornly plots to uncover the criminals' identities, hoping to find enough evidence to get them officially arrested. Pondering her limited options, she considers asking Kane for assistance, wishing she could safely secure help directly from the military. Returning to the present crisis, the maid firmly agrees that they must remain more alert than ever before. Taking a calm sip from her elegant teacup, Renee sits in quiet contemplation over the dangerous reality surrounding them. The maid explains that magical barriers exist within the palace to sense and repel anyone harboring evil intentions toward the queen. Recalling a recent encounter, the maid notes her surprise at discovering how incredibly young the palace's chief magic user truly was. The maid praises the young wizard's exceptional talent, attributing Renee's continued safety to his powerful magical barriers. Taking a breath, the maid finishes her thought, fully convinced that the invisible defenses are keeping her lady completely safe from harm. A sudden wave of paranoia washes over the maid as she tearfully wonders if the assassins have been plotting against Renee's life for much longer than they initially realized. Laughing off the grim theory, Renee points out that her loyal guards have been stationed there since she moved in, meaning any past attempts would have certainly caused a massive uproar. Her maid remains unconvinced and deeply troubled, reminding Renee that they haven't even heard the official story about the hired assassin yet. The maid solemnly points out that Renee could have easily been targeted countless times without her knowledge while remaining completely oblivious under the palace's silent protection. A dark realization flashes across Renee's face as she remembers that her very transfer to the palace was specifically orchestrated to protect the queen. Re-evaluating her past, she questions if His Majesty Sieghard was secretly protecting her all along, disguising his defensive measures as mere royal formalities. Clutching her chest in confusion, she wonders why Sieghard never warned her about the looming dangers if he truly knew she was being actively targeted. The maid quickly tries to de-escalate the tension, suggesting that His Majesty might simply have a very good reason for keeping the terrifying truth from her. Feeling hopelessly in the dark, Renee concludes that regardless of Sieghard's true intentions, he ultimately left her completely blind to the threats surrounding her. Steeling her resolve, she reaffirms her dangerous decision to take matters into her own hands and actively protect herself. Later that night, a weary but smiling Renee cuddles her exceptionally soft stuffed rabbit, finding a fleeting moment of peace after such an emotionally exhausting day. She gently pats the stuffed bunny's head, letting the quiet comfort of her bedroom wash over her. Her large eye remains wide awake in the dark, her thoughts racing far beyond the safety of her bed. Formulating a risky plan, she decides to indirectly ask Kane for help tomorrow, vowing to uncover the assassin's identities herself if he refuses to believe her. Determined not to rely on her cold, distant husband, she pumps her fist in the air and promises to do her absolute best. Tapping her beloved stuffed rabbit playfully, she addresses Yuchan as if seeking the silent toy's approval for her impending mission. Smiling warmly at the plush toy, she assures it that she's a lucky girl who will manage to survive somehow. Snuggling deep into her plush pillows, she thanks Yuchan and expresses her love before finally drifting off to sleep. The following day, the familiar wooden sign of the village restaurant swings gently outside the rustic establishment. Inside the bustling tavern, a concerned Kane leans forward over the counter, noticing her distraction and gently asking if something is bothering her. Caught completely off guard by his sudden perceptiveness, Renee flinches and lets out a startled gasp. Sweating nervously as she steals anxious glances at him, she frantically tries to figure out how to broach the terrifying subject of her assassination without sounding completely insane. A spark of inspiration hits her, and she suddenly asks if Kane will be free later because she desperately needs his advice. Flashing a warm, reassuring smile, the young soldier immediately agrees, promising he'd be glad to help her with anything she needs. Assuring her that his schedule is relatively clear, Kane casually offers to wait around the tavern until she finishes her exhausting work shift, letting out a massive sigh of relief. Renee beams with gratitude and thanks him profusely for his unwavering support. Reaching out to gently pat her head, Kane chuckles and tells her that helping her is absolutely no problem at all. Her face instantly erupts into a bright, flushed red as the unexpected physical affection sends her mind reeling. A collective gasp of absolute shock erupts from the surrounding restaurant staff as they witness the bold, affectionate display. Chaos ensues as the protective kitchen workers barrage Kane with thrown objects, furiously yelling that touching Renee's head is strictly forbidden. Kane angrily snaps at the noisy bums to mind their own business, while the rest of the staff dramatically declares that Renee is far too embarrassed. Still deeply flushed, Renee reflects that aside from the time His Majesty comforted her 6 years ago, this is the first time a man outside her family has ever patted her head. Flustered but determined to stay on track, she quickly dismisses herself back to work, promising to meet up with him the second her shift ends. Watching the romantic chaos unfold with a knowing smirk, the muscular female manager playfully remarks that it must finally be spring. The tall wooden door of the quaint, multi-story village establishment stands open, welcoming the bright afternoon sunlight. Stepping out of the restaurant in her casual dress, Renee apologizes for keeping Kane waiting, to which he warmly praises her for her hard work. Suggesting they find a comfortable place to chat, Renee eagerly asks if they should head to the nearby cake shop to talk as they walk. Her mouth practically waters as her mind immediately conjures up a vivid, delicious image of a fresh strawberry cake. Kane admits the cake sounds incredibly tempting, but seriously advises that they should probably go someplace completely private where their sensitive conversation won't be overheard. Looming before them is an imposing stone fortress, prompting the young man to suggest they head to his office at the military base. The duo approaches the grand archway of the military compound, walking silently past 2 stern guards stationed with tall spears. As they step through the entrance, the guards crisply cross their swords with a resounding metallic clang to acknowledge their arrival. Turning her head in surprise, the maid marvels at how effortlessly Kane was permitted entry even with her in tow. She begins to suspect that her companion might actually be a highly influential person within the military ranks. Observing his confident profile, she wonders if he might secretly be a nobleman. The realization that he possesses his own private office only deepens her swirling suspicions. Unease creeping into her voice, she hesitantly asks Kane if he is of noble blood. She internally panics, realizing that associating with a nobleman would be highly problematic for her current disguise. She nervously babbles that his immense influence and high standing at such a young age led her to that conclusion. Caught off guard by the abrupt inquiry, Kane turns back and asks where this sudden assumption came from. Laughing off her worries, Kane clarifies that she is entirely mistaken about his status. He explains that while he hails from a rural viscount family, as the second son, he doesn't inherit the noble title like his older brother. Holding up a finger to emphasize his point, He admits that his family name is the sole reason his rank holds any weight. He further reveals that his enlistment in the army was entirely due to a recommendation and support from a friend of his father. He casually mentions that nobody questions his position because his recommendation came from the legendary Great General Belheim. Kane chuckles, noting that the locals still treat him like a kid since he's been frequenting the Green Leaves restaurant since his early enlistment days. He adds that the owner and all the regulars are already well aware of his background. Immensely relieved, she realizes that his status means he will likely never cross paths with her true identity as the queen. Wanting to remain a simple maid, she playfully remarks that his endearing nickname, Kanikel, finally makes sense for such an excellent soldier. Opening the door to a surprisingly spacious and well-furnished office, Kane announces their arrival. He courteously gestures toward the comfortable seating area and invites her to take a seat. Taking in the impressive decor and expansive layout of the space, she softly comments on what a remarkably nice room it is. Kane apologizes for any mess, explaining that his constant traveling leaves him little time to tidy up. He notes that his duties frequently require him to commute back and forth from this base to the military headquarters at the royal palace. Settling into the chair opposite her, Kane assures her that the room is completely soundproofed and encourages her to relax. Leaning forward with a serious yet gentle expression, he prompts her to share what she wanted to talk about. The maid sits stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her hands nervously clutching the fabric of her dress as she gathers her courage. Trembling slightly, she confesses that she recently heard something truly terrible. Overwhelmed by the gravity of the secret, she admits she is entirely at a loss for what to do next. Kane's demeanor instantly shifts from relaxed to highly alert as he repeats her ominous words. Launching into her harrowing tale, she explains that she visited the Grand Royal Palace just yesterday. Her intention was simply to visit her childhood friend Emma, who works there as a lady-in-waiting. Casting a nervous, fleeting glance toward Kane, she internally wrestles with her own deception. She anxiously hopes that altering the details of her story to hide her true identity won't backfire. Scrutinizing his attentive and concerned expression, she breathes a tiny sigh of relief. She notes that he doesn't seem the least bit suspicious of her fabricated premise. Continuing her fabricated excuse, she explains that the sprawling palace grounds were so overwhelmingly big that she inevitably got lost. Despite managing to enter the palace, her unfamiliarity with the layout quickly led her astray. Stumbling aimlessly through the labyrinthine corridors, she eventually found herself stepping out into a secluded, little courtyard. Panic flared within her when unfamiliar men suddenly arrived on the scene. Fearing they would be angry if they found her trespassing, she quickly scrambled to hide behind a large stone fountain. Shrouded in the fountain's shadows, she remained completely unnoticed by the men who immediately began talking. The chilling contents of their clandestine conversation sent ice through her veins. With terror widening her eyes, she reveals the devastating truth. The men were discussing their recent, failed attempt to assassinate the queen. A suffocating silence falls over the room as Kane's jaw violently clenches at the mention of high treason. His previously relaxed demeanor evaporates instantly, replaced by the deadly, intense focus of a seasoned soldier ready for war. Desperately waving her hands, she begs him to believe her frantic claims, insisting that she really heard them. She details that they explicitly stated an assassin was sent to the palace yesterday, but the strike failed. Instantly dropping his intimidating aura, Kane quickly apologizes for his intense reaction. He softly assures her that he isn't doubting a single word of her terrifying story. Offering a deeply sympathetic gaze, he sincerely thanks her for having the immense courage to tell him. He gently acknowledges how utterly terrifying it must have been for her to listen to such a deadly conversation. A profound sense of relief washes over her as she realizes that Kane truly doesn't doubt her wild claims. His unwavering belief in her fabricated perspective melts away her lingering anxieties. Leaning forward with professional urgency, Kane asks her to recount every single detail she can remember about the men's conversation. Touched by his earnest trust, she smiles softly and presses a hand to her chest, whispering how glad she is. Gathering her focus, she begins her detailed report by explaining how the palace's magical barrier was penetrated. The mere mention of the royal barrier being breached strikes Kane like a physical blow, his eyes widening in absolute shock. His eyes narrow into sharp, calculating slits as his tactical mind races to process the terrifying implications of her words. She watches his intense expression, silently wondering what strategies are forming behind his piercing gaze. The narrative shifts to reveal the true depth of Kane Lubeck, a fiercely dedicated soldier of Libela. Beyond merely protecting the borders of his country, he bears a heavy, hidden secondary duty. She continues weaving her tale, detailing the conspirators' sinister plans to continue their assassination of the queen. Leaving no stone unturned, she relays everything she remembered about the compromised palace barriers and the mysterious boss behind them. Absorbing the overwhelming tactical intelligence, Kane rests a hand on his chin and quietly mutters in understanding. Having delivered the heavy burden of her secret, the maid sits in tense silence, waiting to see how the soldier will respond. Breaking the heavy silence, Kane addresses her by name, Renee, and urgently asks if she can remember their voices. Renee nods emphatically, stating that the menacing voices are still vividly ringing in her ears. Though she never saw their faces, she is absolutely certain she would recognize them if she heard their voices again. Leaning in with an aura of absolute gravity, Kane warns Renee that he is about to share an important secret. He sternly commands her absolute silence, noting that only a select few soldiers are even aware of what he is about to say. Meeting his intense gaze without flinching, Renee promises with unwavering determination that she won't breathe a word of it to anyone. With pain and urgency lacing his voice, Kane reveals the grim reality of the kingdom's hidden war. He confesses that the queen's life has been in constant, severe danger since half a year ago. Renee gasps in perfectly feigned disbelief, repeating his timeline in a stunned whisper. The shocking revelation that the conspiracy has been active for 6 months leaves her reeling. A dramatic view of the starlit royal palace sets the stage for the dark origins of the conflict. Kane confirms her shock, grimly stating that the relentless assassination attempts began immediately after the wedding. He details how the very first attempt occurred on the evening of the wedding ceremony itself. The enemy infiltrated from the West Palace, explicitly targeting the residence where Count Kralim Height's adopted daughter, the esteemed Melisama, lives. However, Kane bitterly reveals that the attack on the West Palace was nothing more than a calculated diversion. The assassin's real target was always the queen, who was vulnerable inside the main shrine at the time. A light-haired man passionately recounts how His Majesty cleverly avoided their enemy's trap. He reveals that the assassin was swiftly arrested before he could even reach the queen's room. He elaborates that because many guests from different countries attended the wedding ceremony, they absolutely couldn't cause a public fuss. Consequently, the entire assassination attempt was resolved in strict privacy without any official announcements. Looking down with a somber expression, he admits the harsh reality of their secrecy. Naturally, the queen herself wasn't informed about the grave danger she had just escaped. The horrific situation only escalated from that moment on, with persistent and varied attempts on the queen's life. These brutal attacks included not only direct assassination attempts, but also insidious food poisoning and even the use of poisonous insects. Given the escalating severity of the situation, His Majesty took immediate preventative action. To ensure her safety, he discreetly moved the queen away from the palace and into the imperial villa sitting across from Renee. Kane explains that the imperial villa boasts the distinct advantage of being highly secure and located conveniently near the military base. In stark contrast, the main shrine has far too many entrances and exits, making effective surveillance incredibly difficult. Stunned by the revelation, Renee realizes with dread that her friend Emma was entirely correct. She mutters in shock that her life has actually been in constant danger for a while now, completely unaware of the threat until this moment. Overwhelmed by a sudden surge of panicked emotion, she internally screams, questioning why the king didn't tell her something this critically important. She desperately thinks that if he had just explained the true reason for her transfer, she would have completely understood the situation. Kane's expression hardens as he reveals they have exhaustively tried everything to stop the attacks. He grimly notes that if they simply catch the immediate criminals, they will lose the trail and won't be able to capture the real mastermind behind the plot. Pausing briefly, he leans forward to emphasize a critical breakthrough in their stalling investigation. He states that during this grueling process, they have finally discovered an important clue. Renee clutches her chest in utter bewilderment as Kane drops an absolute bombshell. He looks her dead in the eye and declares that the crucial clue is actually her, Renee. Revealing his true affiliation with an intelligence unit, Kane explains they have spent the past 6 months tracking the criminals targeting the Queen and His Majesty. Promising to absolutely protect her, he urgently asks for her cooperation, explaining that the conversation she overheard is the key to identifying the boss's voice and catching the real culprit. Immensely relieved by her decision to confide in Kane, Renee's anxieties melt away. She enthusiastically agrees to help with the investigation, stating it would be her pleasure to assist. 2 teacups sit steaming gently on the table, offering a brief, quiet moment of respite amidst the heavy tactical discussions. Sipping her tea thoughtfully, Renee suddenly shifts the conversation's focus back to the royal conspiracies. She formally addresses Kane, casually asking if he is aware of the assassination attempts that took place at the imperial villa. Glancing away with a visibly conflicted and somber expression, Kane hesitates before answering. He softly confirms that he is indeed aware of the attacks. Frustration bubbling over, Renee passionately demands to know why His Majesty deliberately chose not to inform the Queen about the threats. She argues fiercely that had the Queen been properly informed, she could have acted much more prudently. Staring deeply into his teacup, Kane carefully measures his response to her outburst. He prefaces his thoughts by admitting that since he doesn't know what His Majesty is truly thinking, he can only offer an assumption. Closing his eyes in a moment of quiet reflection, Kane offers a deeply empathetic theory. He suggests that perhaps the king simply doesn't want to unnecessarily scare her. Renee repeats his words incredulously, utterly baffled by the rationale. The idea that keeping the queen in the dark was an act of mercy completely shatters her previous assumptions. Kane elaborates that knowing she is constantly targeted would mean she could never safely let her guard down. Living in that state of perpetual terror would force her to be fiercely protected day and night, stripping away her freedom. Staring out the window, Renee softly reflects on Kane's heartbreaking reasoning. She realizes the king couldn't bear to say such frightening things to a lonely queen who traveled from a faraway country just for their wedding. Complete understanding finally washes over her as she pieces together the king's true strategy. He intended to keep the queen entirely in the dark, shielding her from fear while he silently caught the criminals without her ever finding out. Feeling profoundly foolish, Renee admits she never even considered that protective perspective. She realizes she stubbornly excluded His Majesty from her heart simply because she felt like a useless, decorative queen. Clenching her fists, she angrily attempts to shift the blame to hide her own embarrassment. She playfully shouts, "Enough of that stupid king," insisting he should have been more considerate of her feelings. As the narrative briefly shifts back to the light-haired man, he admits that there were subtle hints scattered here and there. With a self-deprecating smile, he confesses that he is also stupid in the exact same way. Back in the office, Renee seriously ponders her precarious new reality. She realizes that in order to maintain the king's protective illusion, she must completely feign ignorance even if he directly asks her something. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and firmly grabs another person's fingers with a swift, determined motion. Snapping back to reality, Renee forcefully grabs Kane's hands, startling him completely. She practically shouts his name, her eyes burning with a sudden, intense fire. Flustered by her sudden, overwhelming intensity, Kane stammers her name in surprise. Unfazed, Renee fiercely declares that she will do her absolute best to help. Burning with newfound resolve and loyalty, she enthusiastically proposes a partnership. She looks Kane directly in the eye and declares they must protect the queen together. Waving her fist emphatically, she demands they immediately catch the criminals and hand them over to the king. Her overwhelming energy forces a highly flustered Kane to lean back and beg her to please calm down. Staring triumphantly up at the towering fortress walls, Renee makes a final, humorous vow. She promises that after they solve everything, she will definitely be making a massive complaint. Leaving the military building with renewed, boundless energy, she cheerfully waves goodbye. Kane watches her depart, still slightly bewildered by the whirlwind encounter he just experienced. The scene cuts sharply as a pair of heavy leather boots steps firmly through an open doorway. Kane strides purposefully into the room, his demeanor instantly returning to that of a serious soldier. He pulls the door shut behind him, sealing the room with a definitive click. Approaching a large, highly ornate standing mirror, he seamlessly transitions to his next objective. He calmly remarks to himself that he thinks he'll be heading back as well. The surface of the mirror begins to glow brilliantly, transforming from solid glass into a swirling magical portal. Kane boldly steps straight into the ethereal light, utilizing the hidden gateway. With a solid, echoing clonk, he steps out of the portal's light. He now stands on the stone floor of a completely different, dimly lit corridor. Leaving the glowing threshold behind, Kane heads down the quiet, shadowed hallway. His posture is rigid, entirely focused on delivering his crucial intelligence report. As he walks, he casually reaches out his hand. His fingers slide smoothly against the polished surface of the corridor wall. Cain strides confidently into a grand, brightly lit royal office. He approaches two impeccably dressed men who are waiting expectantly for him by a large window. One of the men turns immediately to welcome him back from his covert mission. Wasting no time, he urgently asks Cain if their elaborate plan actually worked. Removing his outer coat, Cain confirms their suspicions with absolute certainty. He tells his superiors that everything played out exactly as he originally thought it would. Standing respectfully before the men, he delivers his full report on the incident. He explains that Lois Lane took a wrong turn in the tunnel, ended up at the royal palace courtyard, and finally discovered her life was being actively targeted. Brushing a hand past his ear, Cain remarks coolly on the inevitability of the situation. He notes that her discovering the terrifying truth was really just a matter of time. The light-haired man takes a deliberate step forward, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily in the room. Looking directly at their leader, he asks exactly what they are going to do next. Cain stands perfectly still and addresses the man in the center with the utmost reverence. He formally acknowledges him, calling him, "Your Majesty Seacard." The king listens to his spymaster in total silence, his expression heavy with contemplation. The fate of the queen and the kingdom rests entirely on his next tactical command. With absolute resolve, the king finally declares his definitive strategy. He announces that Lois Lane will actively help them find the culprit while remaining safely concealed under his direct protection. Offering a gentle, reassuring smile, a silver-haired man named Curtis looks onward with a sense of quiet loyalty. Matching the warm energy of his companion, Abel beams with quiet confidence as he stands ready for his orders. The men agree they must cooperate for a while to ensure that Renee can navigate the shadows and act freely. Both Curtis and Abel enthusiastically fall in line, barking their absolute understanding and unwavering obedience to the crown. A weary Seacard presses a hand to his temple, fearing that if they fail to intervene, the queen will recklessly hunt the culprit on her own. Discussing her odd behavior, someone sharply points out that genuine queens do not show initiative or spend their spare time working as humble waitresses. Emphasizing the perilous stakes, Curtis argues it is highly inappropriate for His Majesty to permit this charade while her life remains in mortal danger. Sitting solemnly upon his ornate chair, King Seacard confesses he simply could not intervene because Lois Lane looked so blissfully happy. The narrative openly mocks Seacard's cowardice, suggesting he must express his concerns to her in a much simpler, more direct manner. Meanwhile, near a bustling dining table, a teasing man laughs about how a blushing maid named Emmy glares at him daily because he failed to explain Murray's question. Emmy furiously dismisses the grinning pervert as he shamelessly admits he loves being treated like a worm, right before someone lets out a sudden sneeze. Tensions subtly rise as the king stews in profound frustration over the fact that his own queen chose to rely on Cain rather than her husband. Wielding a magical earring that allows him to act as Seacard's substitute, a confident Abel promises to protect the queen, find the culprit, and resolve the entire situation. A lingering question hangs heavily in the air regarding whether recent events were merely a coincidence. Pondering the divine revelations surrounding her blessings, Curtis realizes it was completely inevitable that the culprits foolishly chatted right outside her hiding spot. Seacard swiftly shuts down the dangerous line of thought, commanding his subordinate to never carelessly discuss this highly important secret again. Looking down in profound shame, Curtis immediately apologizes for his indiscretion before asking for permission to offer one final conclusion. Staring out the grand windows, the men grimly acknowledge that if the queen falls, curses will flood the country, world war will ignite, and the gods will entirely abandon humanity. The atmosphere grows incredibly heavy with determination as Seacard vows he will absolutely not allow such a catastrophic tragedy to come to pass. With unwavering resolve burning in his chest, the king promises to continue protecting Lois Lane at all costs. Blissfully unaware of the intense meeting, Lois Lane smiles warmly while Emmy carefully brushes out her long, flowing hair. Lois Lane passionately resolves to catch the criminal, realizing that the man she thought was her husband only in name has actually been secretly protecting her all along. The brooding face of King Seacard is shown, hinting at an untold secret identity tied deeply to the ancient curses of the old gods. Later, an emotionally distant Seacard quietly cuts his food at a lavish dining table decorated with towering floral arrangements. Sitting opposite him, Lois Lane silently picks at her own meal, framed by elegant pearls and blooming roses. The clinking of silverware echoes through the dining hall as Lois Lane internally agonizes over the thick, unbearable awkwardness settling between them. She stares blankly ahead, her mind swirling with newfound realizations and conflicting emotions about the powerful man sitting across from her. She reflects on her painful assumption that he only made her queen to mask his affair with a commoner while permanently stealing her freedom in a detached palace. She previously believed his daily breakfast visits were nothing more than a shallow, calculated performance to project the illusion of a happy marriage. Now, gazing at his stoic face, she nervously wonders if he actually visits every single morning just to ensure she is safe and well. Outside, a bright moon hangs quietly over the shadowy, towering architecture of the royal estate. Tossing in her lavish bed, a deeply frustrated Lois Lane groans aloud while clutching her soft, stuffed rabbit against her chest. She gently strokes the long ears of her plush toy, trying to calm the turbulent thoughts racing relentlessly through her head. Overwhelmed by the weight of his hidden protection, she admits she can no longer view His Majesty as a mere stranger, completely breaking her resolve to ignore him. Snapping out of her romantic confusion, she declares to Kane that she must pull herself together and begin actively hunting the culprits tomorrow. She plans to kick off her investigation by carefully identifying the exact location in the inner court where she initially lost her way. By taking on the guise of a lady-in-waiting, she hopes to infiltrate the military headquarters, look around discreetly, and serve as Kane's personal messenger. Kane flashes a confident smile, promising to pay her for her efforts while noting that finding the conversation site will help them seamlessly narrow down their suspect list. Snuggling happily with her stuffed animal, Lois Lane eagerly anticipates leaving her restaurant shift early tomorrow to visit the royal palace alongside Kane. She softly chuckles to herself, amused by how unexpectedly stubborn Kane was about paying her for her dangerous investigative work. Trailing her hand across the soft bedsheets, Lois Lane thoughtfully notes that Kane's unyielding, serious demeanor reminds her intensely of someone else. She compares Kane to King Sieghard, wondering desperately what true emotions hide beneath the monarch's icy, impenetrable guise. Staring into the dark, she realizes with a heavy heart that because she is kept entirely in the dark, she cannot simply ask her husband for the truth while profoundly grateful for his silent protection. A fierce part of her burns with the desire to confront him about the myriad of secrets he keeps locked away. Grounding herself in reality, she accepts that unmasking the assassins targeting the queen is the absolute, most critical first step to solving anything. Clenching her fists with fiery determination, Lois Lane vows to give the investigation her absolute best to protect her own life and ease the king's heavy burdens. A sudden, heavy drop of water plummets from the sky, landing sharply against a broad green leaf. A torrential, unforgiving rainstorm rapidly consumes the towering, ornate exterior of the Grand Palace. The relentless downpour beats heavily against the tall glass windows, casting a dark and gloomy pall over the estate. Cutting through the stormy silence, a voice sharply demands an explanation regarding a sudden, shocking revelation. A man in a sharp suit confirms to his associate that their hired wizard successfully extracted crucial information from a servant stationed at the imperial villa. Biting his thumb in sheer disbelief, the associate marvels at how the queen manages to evade heavy surveillance and sneak out of the imperial villa every single day. A shadowy silhouette of the queen lingers as the spy reports overhearing the anxious gossip of the ladies-in-waiting regarding her mysterious behavior. Standing outside the grand double doors, the maids note that the queen locks herself away at the exact same time every night, allowing only her unseen Rowan attendant inside to receive meals. Two maids whisper conspiratorially, spreading the scandalous rumor that the queen sneaks out of her heavily guarded room and abandons the villa entirely. The informant continues his report, revealing that his spy also managed to overhear another highly sensitive conversation. The Grand Royal Palace of Libela looms in the background as the men discuss the existence of ancient, hidden passages known only to the highest nobility. Gasping in sudden realization, the associate loudly questions if it is possible that the queen is utilizing these secret passages to escape unnoticed. The man in the suit calmly agrees that the presence of hidden corridors makes perfect sense since the queen currently resides in the old palace built for the widowed empress. He deduces that utilizing these forgotten escape routes would easily allow her to bypass the strict surveillance and slip into the city undetected. Clenching his fists with fanatical excitement, the associate declares they must absolutely track her movements outside the palace to save their king from her wicked bloodline. A sinister figure steps out of the shadows, sneering that the blessing of dispelling is an utter abomination and lamenting how the kind king was thoroughly deceived by sweet words. A deeply unsettling, villainous smile stretches across the man's face as he revels in his own dark machinations. The suited man enthusiastically agrees with the sinister figure, theorizing that the wicked witch only married her daughter off in exchange for breaking the king's terrible curse. They chillingly reveal that sacrificing someone from the witch's cursed lineage to God will finally grant their master's long-cherished, dark ambition. Believing his victory is at hand, the sinister man addresses his sweet daughter in absentia and vows that he will undoubtedly save her beloved king. Meanwhile, a contemplative Renee reflects on how their loyal companions were barred from entering Rowan for 6 long years before finally arriving at the palace. Staring obsessively at a framed portrait of a beautiful woman above the fireplace, the sinister man coldly guarantees that the queen will die during their next strike. The dark threats fade away as a peaceful Renee slumbers quietly, her rest punctuated only by a soft rumbling sound. Morning sunlight bathes the bustling, European-style streets outside the lively restaurant where Renee works. Dressed in her modest uniform, an apologetic Renee asks for a pardon to leave her shift early just as Liguilla reminds her that it is almost time to go. Flashing an encouraging thumbs up, Liguilla warmly tells Renee not to worry about the restaurant and to go help Kane with his important work. Maintaining her supportive smile, Liguilla gently warns the eager young woman not to overexert herself on this dangerous mission. Renee cheerfully acknowledges the warning and bids a fond farewell to her supportive boss as she heads out the door. Burning with newfound resolve, the disguised queen fiercely promises herself that she will definitely hunt down the criminal mastermind behind her own assassination plot. The narrative shifts focus, highlighting her absolute determination to uncover the identities of the elusive culprits. In order to catch the assassins who tried to murder her, she officially begins her dangerous new undercover role as a humble lady-in-waiting. Riding away in a carriage, Renee reflects on how smoothly Kane negotiated with Liguilla and Kitsu to secure her early departure from the restaurant. However, she grimly notes that Emma was the single dissenting voice who absolutely refused to agree with this reckless espionage plan. A tense flashback reveals a frantic Emma arguing that trusting this mysterious Kane and sneaking into the royal palace will expose her true identity to far too many people. Staring at Kane's stoic profile, Renee silently admits that she completely understands Emma's fierce protective instincts since she has only known him for 2 short months. Adjusting her unassuming spectacles, Renee hardens her resolve and promises to work tirelessly to protect herself now that she can finally fight back. Noticing her sudden tension, Kane gently asks if she is alright, prompting Renee to sheepishly admit she is simply nervous about wearing a lady-in-waiting uniform for the very first time. Kane calmly explains the strict hierarchy of the royal palace of Libela, noting that white bows serve nobles, blue bows denote standard ladies-in-waiting, and her specific uniform belongs to the military authority. Surprised by the intricate system, Renee marvels at the fact that she never even realized the palace servants were strictly segregated by ribbon color. Gazing out at the towering palace gates, she heavily realizes she can no longer afford to be a mere decorative queen and must actively observe the mountain of things she remains ignorant about. Their sleek black carriage finally rolls up to the towering, heavily guarded iron gates of the royal palace. Once inside, a mildly surprised Kane notes that the usually strict security guards finish their procedures unusually fast and let them through without a hint of suspicion. Kane admits he pointed out the lax security specifically to ease her obvious anxiety, though Renee immediately complains that his reassurance actually makes it sound like she is going to get caught. Flashing a confident smile, Kane promises that if she ever arouses suspicion or gets stopped by the guards, she simply needs to contact him and he will immediately come to her rescue. Pushing the heavy carriage door open, Kane instructs her to head straight to his personal office so they can establish her official base of operations. Stepping out into the sunlight, Kane turns back and politely offers his gloved hand to help his disguised queen descend from the carriage. Renee freezes in place, blinking down at his outstretched hand in sudden, unexpected hesitation. She desperately wonders if it is actually appropriate for a high-ranking military officer to escort a supposedly lowly lady-in-waiting in such a public space. Completely distracted by her internal panic, she blindly takes a step forward and immediately stumbles over the edge of the carriage floor. A startled yelp escapes her lips as gravity aggressively yanks her forward into a sudden, uncontrolled fall. Kane swiftly catches her before she can hit the ground, gently asking if she is all right as her feet finally touch the cobblestone. Blushing furiously behind her spectacles, Renee stammers out a nervous apology and thanks him for saving her from a careless disaster. Without a single word of warning, Kane suddenly yanks her forward and wraps her in an incredibly tight, deeply intimate embrace. Renee's eyes widen in absolute shock just as the terrifying, sharp whistle of a blade slices violently through the air right where she had been standing. Tumbling forward with a sudden loss of balance, the clumsy girl frantically apologizes for always falling down. Smiling warmly as he effortlessly catches her mid-fall, the young man expresses his profound relief that she managed to avoid getting hurt. Flashing a charming grin, the disguised king playfully remarks that he doesn't mind as long as he is the one catching her, promptly suggesting they head toward the military headquarters. The crisp, rhythmic tap of their boots echoes softly across the textured cobblestone pathway as they walk side by side. Overwhelmed by the physical proximity, Renee clutches her thoroughly flushed cheeks in embarrassment, internally panicking over the undeniable fact that she is still blushing uncontrollably. Attempting to rationally process her intense reaction, she mentally notes that she has never been this close to a man outside of her immediate family, quietly conceding that her flustered state simply cannot be helped. Deepening her silent reflection, she admits that unlike the perfectly composed Kane-san, she still completely lacks the social experience needed to get used to such intimate interactions. Unbeknownst to the flustered maid diligently walking behind him, Kane subtly raises a gloved hand to conceal his own furiously blushing face, silently revealing his deeply shared romantic vulnerability. Arriving at the imposing, multi-level stone courtyard of their prestigious destination, Kane formally welcomes Renee to the grand military headquarters. Shifting immediately into a commanding, professional demeanor, he announces that he will first explain the precise, critical details of what her upcoming job entails. Recalling their previous private conversation from the other day, he explicitly tasks her to act as his covert messenger and subtly survey the area while delivering documents, stressing the paramount strategic need to locate the specific courtyard where a targeted conversation occurred. Standing discreetly near an armed palace guard, Renee listens intently as Kane strategically advises her to simply pretend to be lost if she accidentally attracts too much unwanted attention. Brandishing a thick stack of essential documents, Kane sets a strict 1-hour time limit for her to complete the deliveries and safely return, officially directing her to commence her covert search starting from the east wing of the main shrine. Accepting the heavy paperwork with an enthusiastic, beaming smile, Renee confidently confirms her total understanding and eagerly asks for her exact starting point. Glancing down at the intricately marked envelope, she physically flinches as she realizes the critical missive is explicitly designated for Duke Talus' formidable chancellery. Frozen in momentary shock, she nervously repeats the intimidating Duke's name while a massive drop of cold sweat visibly forms on her trembling face. Overcome with sudden anxiety, she accurately recalls that the powerful Duke Talus serves as both the head of the Chancellery and the chairman of the House of Lords, wielding significant political influence due to his close relationship with the Queen, prompting Kane to gently reassure her that she can merely leave the documents with the secretary rather than facing the terrifying Duke personally. Exhaling a massive sigh of profound emotional relief, Renee fervently thanks God for the procedural loophole and gratefully accepts the modified delivery instructions. Gesturing forward with calm, reassuring assurance, Kane helpfully points out that the designated East Wing is conveniently located just a short distance up ahead. Locking eyes with his determined young messenger, Kane bestows a highly supportive smile and firmly places the ultimate success of the investigative mission squarely upon Renee's capable shoulders. Eyes sparkling with unwavering determination, the cheerful maid emphatically accepts the heavy responsibility and sincerely promises to reunite with him in exactly 1 hour. Steeling her nerves for the daunting espionage task ahead, she whispers a solitary word of profound encouragement to herself, invoking the name Lois Line as she steps boldly into the unknown. Driven by a deep, unshakable sense of loyalty to the man who took such incredibly good care of her, she mentally reiterates her urgent objective to quickly locate the elusive courtyard and uncover the true, hidden intentions of the unknown culprits. The majestic, imposing facade of the royal palace looms silently against the cloudy sky, its grand arched windows and pristine architecture guarding countless dark political secrets within. A thunderous, echoing thud shatters the quiet, tense atmosphere of the office as a massive, intimidating mountain of neglected paperwork is forcefully slammed down onto a wooden desk. Gazing down at the overwhelming pile of administrative labor, a visibly exhausted aide with light hair comments dryly on the sheer, terrifying volume of documents that have relentlessly accumulated. A penetrating, furious stare reflects simmering emotional frustration as an unseen observer sharply questions exactly how many more days the stubborn queen intends to waste searching for the non-existent courtyard. Clutching a clipboard filled with urgently pending matters, The diligent royal aide Curtis directly addresses the weary ruler seated before him, formally calling out to His Majesty Sieghard. Keeping his heavy, exhausted eyes firmly closed, Sieghard calmly instructs the anxious Curtis to remain patient, calculating that the Queen's entirely futile search has only lasted 5 days and should inevitably conclude within a week at most. Scowling with undisguised, bitter irritation, the fiercely loyal Abel squarely blames Sieghard for creating the entire disastrous debacle, expressing deep, genuine pity for the Queen's highly unfortunate situation. Abel indignantly points out that the dedicated Queen is currently expending a massive amount of physical effort searching the East Wing courtyard, despite the absolute certainty that there are 0 secret doors located anywhere in that specific area. Slowly opening his eyes to confront the harsh, uncompromising reality of his own ruthless machinations, Sieghard offers a quiet, deeply resigned murmur of agreement to Abel's scathing assessment. Because the highly secure royal palace ensures that every single secret door is heavily guarded by lethal forces, the king's inner circle knew immediately from Loisline's pivotal, compromised testimony that the actual courtyard in question was securely hidden far away within the north wing. Staring downward with a profoundly conflicted, sorrowful expression, Sieghard desperately attempts to justify his elaborate, cruel deception to Abel by insisting it is strictly for her own ultimate good, while silently agonizing over his overwhelming, heartbreaking need for her to truly believe his carefully fabricated narrative. While Renée is shown diligently navigating the vast, sunlit corridors on her mission, Sieghard explains that if he had simply kept her safely sidelined, she inevitably would have investigated the highly dangerous matter completely on her own, forcing him to strategically impose strict logistical restrictions to prevent her from acting recklessly. He rationalizes his extremely controlling methods by noting that her rigidly assigned path makes it incredibly difficult for her to act out independently, ensuring that even if an unforeseen danger suddenly arises, she remains securely guarded at all times by the elite, deadly shadows of the royal family. Flipping a crisp white page of the detailed intelligence report in his hand, the calculating monarch prepares to formally reveal the secondary tactical advantage of his highly convoluted master plan. He firmly asserts that ever since she first dangerously stumbled upon the restricted secret passages, he has been actively developing a comprehensive, foolproof countermeasure designed specifically to teach her the palace layout in a safe, controlled manner so she would absolutely never get lost again. By methodically walking around the sprawling royal palace on carefully controlled errands, she will inadvertently memorize crucial places and escape passages, a strategic environmental knowledge that could make a life-or-death difference should she ever find it absolutely necessary to flee in the perilous future. Utterly dumbfounded by the king's incredibly convoluted, deeply flawed romantic logic, a sweating Abel bluntly demands to know why Sieghard acts like a complete and total loser whenever he is actually standing directly in front of the woman he claims to care so much about. Pressing his brutal, unyielding psychological interrogation, Abel highlights the glaring, embarrassing discrepancy in the king's behavior, noting that while the regal Sieg is agonizingly slow and awkward around the queen, his disguised, lower-class persona as Cain can effortlessly and naturally converse with her. Stepping in to immediately defend his heavily scrutinized monarch, Curtis dismissively huffs that this pathetic behavior is simply the natural, inescapable weakness of harboring a massive crush, astutely adding that their painfully unrequited love is further complicated by a multitude of severe interpersonal and political problems. Visibly flustered by the painfully accurate psychoanalysis, Sieghard angrily shouts that he already knows his deep personal flaws, desperately demanding they hand over the pending documents immediately because they are completely out of precious time. A somber, shadowed profile of the deeply burdened sovereign reflects the heavy, soul-crushing toll of his reign, detailing how Sieghard was tragically forced to take the crown and follow in his father's massive footsteps after the previous king suddenly passed away 6.5 years ago. Thrust aggressively onto the unforgiving throne at the fragile age of 16, the terrified young boy was forced to entirely abandon his fleeting youth, transforming into a rigid disciplinarian who had absolutely no choice but to be impossibly strict with both himself and his subjects in order to successfully rule such a massive and powerful kingdom. Under the crushing, unrelenting weight of the glorious crown, his naturally cheerful and jovial personality gradually faded away into nothingness, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who could no longer express genuine human emotions until this icy, unfeeling aspect permanently morphed into his real, everyday self. Observing their beloved king slowly drowning under the immense, suffocating pressure of his royal duties, the deeply worried duo of Abel and Curtis took drastic, unprecedented measures, ingeniously creating a completely fabricated civilian character to afford their sovereign a desperate chance to finally catch his breath. The resulting alter ego, a meticulously crafted, psychological illusion of absolute freedom and normalcy, is the charming and carefree man known to the unsuspecting world simply as Cain. Stepping out from the suffocating, gilded palace walls under the liberating guise of Cain, the disguised king was finally able to seamlessly mingle with the ordinary citizens of the bustling city, unlocking his fiercely guarded heart to actively express his true, deeply suppressed emotions for the first time in incredibly long years. Looking over his shoulder with a brilliant, entirely unburdened smile, the desperately lonely man who is secretly a king finally allows himself to laugh openly and freely, finding fleeting but profound emotional salvation in his hidden, secondary life among the commoners. Gazing up at a flock of doves, the disguised king reflects that in this form, he can finally shed the crushing burden of his royal duties and embrace his true self. A heavy shadow falls over his thoughts as he bitterly acknowledges that this fleeting freedom only exists when he is living as Cain. Staring into a reflection of his own stoic face, Sieghard admits that his emotions instantly turn to stone the moment he resumes his royal identity. Remembering the unexpected kindness Lois Lane showed him on their wedding day, he notes that the profound shock he felt sparked a startling change within his guarded heart. As the days of living alongside his new queen quietly pass, the once icy ruler can physically feel his cold, unyielding expressions slowly begin to melt away. Tapping his hand anxiously on the desk, Abel firmly warns Sieghard that keeping the queen entirely in the dark is a terrible idea, even if it is meant for her own protection. Pressing the issue further, Abel questions if simply protecting her is truly enough, predicting that she will inevitably become furious once she discovers the deception. Stepping in to support his colleague, Curtis agrees with Abel and gently chastises the king for his destructive habit of always carrying the world's weight entirely alone. Brushing off their genuine concerns with a firm stride, Sieghard insists his plan is fine, clarifying that his goal is not to win her favor but to quietly solve the dangerous conspiracy without her ever knowing. Softening his gaze, the devoted monarch reveals his ultimate desire is simply to see Lois Lane smile brightly without carrying a single worry in the world. Staring out into the distant light, he reaffirms the solemn, unbroken vow he secretly made 6 years ago to protect her. A vivid memory of Lois Lane's gentle silhouette flashes through his mind as the driving force behind his relentless determination. Smiling radiantly with a bouquet of flowers in his memory, Lois Lane stands as the miracle girl he has fiercely promised to protect with his life. Meanwhile, after 6 exhausting days of relentless research, a wide-eyed Renee triumphantly realizes she has finally cracked the mystery without a shadow of a doubt. Clutching her documents tightly, the determined maid celebrates her massive breakthrough and excitedly declares that their covert mission continues. A lingering sense of mystery surrounds the king's true motivations, raising the question of whether he really orchestrated this entire grand deception purely for Lois Lane's sake. Bursting with infectious excitement, Renee enthusiastically informs a stunned Cain that she has successfully located the elusive courtyard. Confirming that the conspirators' meeting place is secretly nestled within the north wing, Cain firmly assures her that he will immediately launch a full investigation into every noble who entered the area. Astonished by the sheer, overwhelming size of Libela's royal palace, Renee eagerly agrees to prioritize hunting down the men in the north wing starting first thing tomorrow morning. Sweating nervously as she gazes out at the sprawling architecture, she silently notes that her entire home country's castle could easily fit inside this singular, massive structure. Calling an end to the day's exhausting espionage, Cain completely agrees that safely identifying the treacherous men tomorrow is their absolute highest priority. Expressing his deep, genuine gratitude for her hard work, Cain sternly warns Renee not to overdo it since their ruthless targets are actively plotting to assassinate the queen. Pumping her fists with confident determination, Renee promises not to act carelessly, though Cain quickly responds with a highly skeptical, teasing doubt. Slightly pouting at his playful lack of faith, the dedicated maid stubbornly accepts his protective warning. Melting into a tender, appreciative smile, the disguised monarch warmly praises his little messenger for all the incredibly hard work she has done. Reaching out with gentle affection, he lightly pats the flustered maid on the top of her head to reward her diligent efforts. Laughing brightly as a blushing Renee frantically protests that he is tangling her hair, Cain quickly apologizes while secretly thinking her flustered reaction is entirely adorable. The cheerful sound of Kane's echoing laughter fills the bright courtyard as Renee indignantly yells that she is absolutely not a pet. Later that evening, the quiet, shadowy palace windows reflect the shifting transition from a day of covert action to a night of peaceful rest. Snuggling happily into her plush bed, Renee excitedly tells her stuffed bunny, Yuchan, all about her successful mission and the delicious cake Kane gave her as a reward. Gently stroking the floppy ears of her plush rabbit, she shyly confesses to the toy that she felt incredibly embarrassed when Kane affectionately touched her. Staring off into the quiet room, she warmly praises the disguised king for being such a kind, thoughtful gentleman, confidently predicting that he will make an absolutely wonderful husband one day. Suddenly noticing a strange, unexpected shift in her immediate surroundings, a highly confused Renee blinks down and calls out to her beloved toy. To her absolute mind-blowing shock, the lifeless plush toy has seemingly transformed into a genuinely real, incredibly tiny, and impossibly cute living rabbit covering its bashful face. Overwhelmed by the majestic sight, her eyes sparkle with massive, unfiltered joy as she internally screams about how ridiculously cute the little creature is. Completely melting at the precious sight of its tiny, twitching paws, she lets out a long, deeply smitten sigh of pure adoration. Cuddling the adorable animal tightly against her chest, she playfully decides that while Kane is undeniably lovely, the fluffy Yuchan will always remain her absolute favorite. Exactly 1 full week after her major investigative breakthrough, the sun rises brightly over the sprawling, heavily guarded royal estate. Returning from another long, exhausting shift of palace surveillance, Renee is warmly greeted by Emma, who immediately asks if she encountered any dangerous, lurking threats during her search. Setting down her heavy lantern, a deeply fatigued Renee announces her safe return and quickly reassures her anxious friend that the North Wing was completely devoid of danger. Dropping her optimistic facade, she frowns deeply and admits the highly frustrating truth that their ongoing investigation hasn't yielded a single shred of actual progress. Theorizing why she has never heard the conspirators' voices again despite her constant patrols, she wonders aloud if the treacherous men had merely been passing through the North Wing completely by accident on that fateful day. Refusing to let the frustrating setback completely crush her spirit, she fiercely resolves to remain patient and work even harder, fueled entirely by the warm encouragement Kane previously gave her. Catching on to the rapidly recurring theme in her friend's daily reports, Emma listens quietly as Renee immediately launches into yet another glowing anecdote about Kane. Flashing a highly knowing, perceptive smile, Emma bluntly points out that Renee has been gleefully talking about this mysterious Kane nonstop lately, causing the flustered maid to visibly jump in surprise. Teasingly noting that the handsome knight is now mentioned far more frequently than her absolute favorite restaurant, Emma watches with deep amusement as a sweating Renee desperately tries to quickly change the embarrassing subject. Cutting straight through the flimsy defensive excuses, Emma boldly leans in and asks the massive, underlying question of whether Renee actually has a huge romantic crush on Kane. Refusing to let her incredibly flustered friend wriggle out of the rapidly escalating confrontation, Emma declares that she is going to make her underlying suspicions perfectly, absolutely clear. Dropping all pretenses and playful teasing, Emma formally addresses her by name and directly asks if she has completely, undeniably fallen in love with the disguised king. Struck by the massive, life-altering realization, a fiercely blushing Renee stares forward in total, absolute shock as the heavy, terrifying word echoes loudly in her racing mind, vigorously shaking her head to dismiss the misconception. She insists that despite what others might think, he is undeniably a genuinely good person. Overwhelmed by her current circumstances, she breaks down into distressed tears, lamenting that she simply does not have the luxury or the time to be entangled in romantic love. Resolutely prioritizing her duty over her personal desires, she adamantly declares that she will never do anything detrimental to her country, firmly ruling out any chance of falling in love with His Majesty or Kane-san. Bridging the emotional distance between them, a pair of hands reach out to offer tender comfort and silent reassurance. Gently holding Renee's hands to offer solace, Emma softly apologizes for her blunt questioning while reassuring her that falling in love is never a truly bad thing. Expressing deep concern over the complexities of her elevated position, a serious Kane warns that pursuing a relationship with a mere soldier will ultimately prove tough and only end up hurting Renee. Finding comfort in the genuine care displayed by her loyal confidants, Renee offers a gentle, appreciative smile. Brushing off their deep anxieties with a brave face, she gratefully thanks Emma for her worry while confidently asserting that she cannot get hurt since she is not actually in love. Smiling warmly to mask any underlying tension, Renee pragmatically explains that an infidelity-based divorce is impossible and would only inflict severe political trouble upon her home country and cherished family. Seeking to soothe her lady's lingering anxieties over a quiet cup of tea, Emma gently calls out to Renee, offering comforting reassurance that everything will ultimately be okay. Noting that the investigation into the North Gate has completely stalled, Emma insightfully suggests shifting their tactical focus directly onto uncovering the true identity of the criminal mastermind. Analyzing the delicate political climate from his study, Kane carefully notes that while only a small fraction of nobles actively opposed the royal wedding, a significant number of those who remained silent were still deeply unhappy about it. Highlighting the sheer logistical nightmare of their security efforts, investigators lament that keeping track of everyone remains exceedingly difficult even after explicitly narrowing the suspect list down to the North Wing workers. Grappling with the terrifying reality of her vulnerable isolation, Renee finally begins to understand why His Majesty locked her away in a detached palace, especially since she has no idea who her true enemies are. Frustratedly tossing her belongings onto the elegant sofa, she complains bitterly about being kept completely in the dark, though she quickly concedes that his secrecy is a completely different problem. Putting the chaotic pieces together with sharp clarity, Emma succinctly summarizes the terrifying scope of their predicament by declaring that all of the nobles within the country are currently suspects. Pondering the driving force behind such a drastic assassination attempt against the Queen, Emma deduces that there must be a compelling motive and asks Renee what that underlying reason could possibly be. Suddenly appearing with a sweeping motion to join the intense brainstorming session, a concerned Kane echoes their thoughts by questioning what possible motive could justify such extreme, treasonous actions. Resting her chin on her hand in deep contemplation, Renee seriously mulls over the perplexing question of the assassin's true motive. Analyzing the darkest corners of human nature, they mentally list power, resentment, and jealousy as the most likely psychological catalysts for the crime. Holding up 3 confident fingers to emphasize her deductive reasoning, Emma firmly concludes that among those specific 3 options, one stands out as the most overwhelmingly probable, pointing an accusatory finger upward to highlight the undeniable truth of human frailty. She dramatically isolates jealousy as the primary driving force. Sharing his own strategic insights into the royal court's hidden drama, Kane theorizes that a specific woman who once harbored a slim chance of marrying the king may have severely wavered in her loyalty. Explaining that most former queen candidates have already been thoroughly cleared, he voices his deep, lingering suspicions about the one specific person who possesses the unique ability to become the king's ultimate weakness. Shocked by this unexpected revelation and desperate for answers, Renee nervously demands to know the true identity of this mysterious, dangerous woman. Framing the suspect in a dramatic, illuminating silhouette, the shocking truth is finally unveiled that the primary target of their suspicion is actually His Majesty's own lover, Mili-sama. Staring ahead with wide, terror-stricken eyes, a completely blindsided Renee utters a breathless gasp of sheer disbelief at the scandalous accusation. Speaking with absolute, unwavering conviction, Emma asserts that since her lover married someone else, Mili-sama would undoubtedly be the most violently jealous person in the entire kingdom. Frantically interrupting her maid's aggressive train of thought, Renee argues that since a commoner like Mile could never legally become queen, she was far from the only viable candidate in the running. Countering that logic by pointing out that the king likely thought the exact same thing, Emma argues that a wildly jealous woman doesn't need a rational reason, though she struggles to explain how someone confined to the imperial palace could orchestrate such a complex plot. Narrowing her eyes as the sinister pieces finally fall into place, Emma ominously notes that Mile also possesses the secretive means to execute such a deadly plan. Expanding on the deeply entrenched political connections at play, Emma speculates that the isolated lover could have easily dispatched the lethal assassin from the house of Count Krulim Heights or directly from Abel's own estate. Urging her mistress to take immediate, decisive action, Emma specifically instructs Renee to ask Kane to formally investigate the highly suspicious Mili-sama during their next encounter. Transitioning to the bright, sprawling cityscape the very next day, the narrative seamlessly shifts to follow the ongoing investigation as new plans are put into motion. Moving with quiet, deliberate purpose, a solitary footstep echoes sharply against the textured stone of the imposing city wall. Disguised in modest maid attire to avoid unwanted attention, Renee walks briskly down the sunlit cobblestone path, the crisp clacking of her shoes betraying her nervous energy. Adjusting her spectacles as she mentally prepares for the daunting task ahead, Renee quietly murmurs the name of her primary target, Mili-sama. Trying to organize her scattered thoughts while tapping her temple, she admits that she has never actually met the woman and has honestly spent very little time pondering the sparse information she has gathered. Recalling the fragile profile of a shy, pretty, and unassuming woman, Renee remembers how Millet tragically secluded herself in the imperial palace after being cruelly mocked at Prince Tari's daughter's tea ceremony. Staring blankly at the rough brick wall in front of her, a disguised Renee falls into a tense, contemplative silence as she weighs the heavy accusations. Questioning the fundamental validity of their entire theory, Renee expresses deep doubt that such a fragile, withdrawn woman is actually capable of committing a cold-blooded murder. Rationalizing the investigative strategy as a way to find personal peace, she hopes that investigating Millet will calm her down and eliminate the daily, exhausting need to constantly watch out for Abel. Relying on cold logic rather than personal prejudice, Kane confidently asserts that his unbiased reasoning has also led him to the firm conclusion that Millie-sama is the culprit. Admitting her own blinding biases, Renee realizes she never suspected Millet because of her intense dislike for her stepbrother Abel, the son of Krelim Heights, while also noting Emma's strange obsession with detective novels. Smiling with a heavy drop of awkward sweat, Renee wonders if this entire dramatic ordeal is simply unfolding because her maid has been completely overly influenced by fictional detective stories. Reliving the terrifying trauma of the unexpected attack, a shadowy flashback reveals the panicked moment the blame was furiously pinned solely on the assassin's disastrous actions. Standing stoically under the bright daytime sky, the grand, arched architecture of the impressive governmental building serves as the imposing backdrop for their next secretive move. Handing over a highly sensitive document with strict instructions, someone orders that it be delivered to Foreign Minister Donnell today, noting that labeling it an immigration request will make him understand immediately. Approaching Kane's desk with visibly nervous hesitation, the disguised Renee timidly stammers out a greeting to capture his attention. Looking up from his busy paperwork with perceptive concern, Kane immediately asks Renee if something is wrong, noting that she looked like she desperately wanted to say something even when they were riding in the carriage earlier. Kane immediately asks Renee if she has noticed anything regarding the Queen's assassination attempt, wondering who she wants investigated. Renee confirms her intent, specifically requesting a full investigation into Millie-sama, the adopted daughter of Krelim Heights. Kane reacts with visible shock at the mere mention of Millie's name. Renee apologizes for the sensitive nature of her request, explaining she heard about the king's lover from a close friend of Emma's and believes Millet has ample reason to target the queen. Kane abruptly dismisses the notion, insisting that Millet absolutely isn't the culprit. He firmly declares that it is just impossible for her to have done it, though he admits he hasn't actually investigated her yet. Renee pushes back, demanding to know how he can be so certain she's not the culprit or if His Majesty told him otherwise. Kane tries to silence her, stating there was no need to investigate and that he certainly would have if there had been any doubt. Skeptical, Renee asks, then how? She begins to wonder why Kane is so intent on protecting Millie-sama. A tense silence falls between them in the office. Kane lets out a heavy, frustrated sigh. He decides to explain the situation regarding Millie-sama to prevent a misunderstanding, even though the matter is top secret. Renee waits with bated breath, repeating the name Millie-sama as she prepares for the revelation. Kane begins his explanation, starting with, "Actually, Millie-sama?" The conversation is suddenly cut short as a soldier enters, announcing that General Belbite requires Kane's presence in his office. Frustrated by the terrible timing, Kane curses under his breath but agrees to go immediately. He apologizes to Renee, telling her they will continue the conversation later and instructing her to take her documents to the North Wing. Renee smiles and agrees to see him later, though her mind is clearly still racing. Renee walks down the palace hallway, left alone with her thoughts. She confirms her task to deliver foreign affairs papers while wondering if Kane is still on his mission. Her footsteps echo sharply as she moves quickly through the corridor. Still plagued by doubt, she wonders why Kane-san is so incredibly sure that Millie-sama couldn't be the culprit. She considers that no matter how dear Millet may be to the king, it doesn't automatically prove her innocence. Renee passes other palace staff as she focuses on her delivery mission. She continues down the hall, clutching the documents to her chest. Renee struggles to focus, realizing she's too distracted by the investigation to concentrate and decides to stop her work early. She hands a document over to a palace official. Renee makes her way down a grand staircase. She enters another part of the palace, still lost in her musings. Distracted, Renee turns a corner and nearly collides with someone. With a startled Renee hits the floor with a loud thud. She cries out in pain as she lands hard on the tiles. Calling herself hopeless, Renee immediately begins apologizing profusely to the person she bumped into. The other person apologizes in return, admitting they weren't paying enough attention either. Renee freezes as she hears the stranger's voice. Her eyes widen in a moment of pure shock. She recognizes the voice instantly, realizing it's the exact one she's been searching for. Renee thinks, "I finally found the one with that voice." She realizes there is no doubt about the identity of the person standing before her. Renee confirms that the voice she heard from behind the secret door belongs to this man. She stares up at him in disbelief, questioning how it could be this person. The man, confused by her reaction, asks what happened and if she is hurt. He realizes who she is and gasps, "Are you?" Panicked, Renee bolts away at full speed while the man screams for her to wait. Another man, Delta, approaches and asks what happened, while the first man, Lambda, expresses relief at being found. Lambda reveals the shocking truth. The woman who just bolted away was actually the queen in disguise. He orders Delta to follow her and act normal while he goes to inform their boss. Lambda laughs manically, declaring that his lord will soon be resurrected if they sacrifice the favorite of the gods. He lets out one last dark, chilling laugh as the plan reaches its tipping point. A single black shoe strikes the floor with a sharp, rhythmic thud, signaling Renee's desperate and hurried flight through the palace's silent corridors. Renee reels in absolute disbelief, her mind racing as she struggles to comprehend the impossible and terrifying truth she has just uncovered. She vividly recalls the diplomat from Rowan and his constant shadow, the attendant of Earl Arkance, realizing their presence in the palace is a harbinger of danger. Identifying the voice from the courtyard, Renee confirms that the man before her is indeed the same individual she heard lurking in the shadows earlier that night. A chilling realization settles in her heart as she concludes that her very life is likely being targeted by the high-ranking Earl Arkance. With a sense of frantic urgency, Renee bursts into the room to find Kane-san and share the life-altering discovery that has left her trembling. Startled by her sudden and breathless entrance, Kane-san drops his paperwork and demands to know what could have possibly happened to cause such distress. Lunging toward him with desperate intensity, Renee cries out that she has finally located the mysterious man she heard conspiring in the courtyard. Flushed with anxiety, she explains that the suspect is an attendant to Earl Arkance and officially belongs to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Kane-san's face pales as the name of Earl Arkance is uttered, the immense weight of the accusation hanging heavy between them in the silent room. There is no room for doubt in Renee's mind as she confirms the identity with absolute certainty, her gaze fixed and unwavering. She understands that Kane-san's overwhelming shock is natural given the Earl's previously unblemished reputation and high standing in the court. Though the Earl supported her ascension to the throne and appeared kind, Renee now wonders if a murderous intent lurked behind his gentle facade all along. She suspects the attendant was stunned to see her face, potentially realizing for the first time that the lady-in-waiting is actually the queen herself. Kane-san immediately vows to inform Chancellor Curtis and place the Earl and his men under strict custody for further verification and questioning. Despite the current lack of physical evidence, Kane-san insists on a thorough investigation to uncover their true motives and thwart the assassination plot. Hovering with protective concern, Kane-san asks if Renee was harmed or touched during her brief and dangerous encounter with the conspirators. Renee worries that her suspicious behavior during the investigation might have inadvertently tipped off the enemy to her true purpose and identity. Her eyes widen with a new fear as she wonders if the attendant truly noticed the secret she was trying so hard to keep hidden behind her disguise. Declaring the royal palace far too dangerous for her to remain, Kane-san decides to escort Renee back to the safety of the Green Leaves restaurant immediately. He promises to arrange for a secure escort to drive her home and ensures that the restaurant owner will be properly informed of the situation. A heavy, horse-drawn carriage waits in the dimly lit street, ready to whisk the disguised queen away from the treacherous grounds of the palace. The wooden sign of the Green Leaves restaurant swings gently in the night breeze, marking their arrival at Renee's humble and familiar sanctuary. Preparing to depart, Kane-san informs Renee that he must return to his investigation at the palace but promises to update her on their progress tomorrow. Kane-san formally entrusts Renee's safety to Madame Liguilla, who accepts the heavy responsibility with a reassuring nod and a steady gaze. Renee warns Kane-san to remain vigilant, noting that the color of her ribbon has already identified her as a lady-in-waiting to the military authority. Kane-san brushes off his own safety with a determined look, stating that he is far more concerned for René's well-being now that her face has been seen. Attempting to lighten the heavy mood, René tells him to remain calm and focused now that the primary suspects are safely in custody. With a final, solemn parting word, Kane-san disappears back into the night, leaving René alone to reflect on the day's harrowing events. A profound silence falls over the room as René stands alone, the weight of the impending conflict settling deep in her heart. The evening light dims as the internal gears of the restaurant begin to stir, shifting toward the start of another busy shift. Relieved that the villains' identities have finally been unmasked, René feels a temporary and fleeting sense of closure for her part in the investigation. She silently hopes the Earl isn't truly the mastermind while deciding to leave the remaining military work to Kane-san and his specialized corps. Madame L'Aiguille tells René to sit down and rest for a moment, promising that someone will drive her home the moment they finish their current tasks. Confused by the sudden mention of an escort, René questions who exactly will be responsible for her safe passage through the darkening streets. Despite it being break time at the restaurant, the kitchen of green leaves clatters with the sounds of intense preparation for the next wave of customers. René tries to protest the disruption of the kitchen schedule, but L'Aiguille-san firmly silences her concerns with a sharp and commanding look. L'Aiguille-san explains that they will simply delay the reopening of the restaurant, noting that Kane-san would be far too worried if they did otherwise. Pointing toward the street, L'Aiguille-san suggests that René ask one of the regular customers for an escort once they arrive for their evening drinks. She explains that the regulars often arrive before opening to drink sake, the only item the restaurant can serve without active cooking during preparations. The doors swing open as the local regulars burst in with boisterous greetings, calling out for their usual serving of cheap sake to end their day. L'Aiguille-san smirks at the incredibly timely arrival of the customers, remarking that they have appeared right on cue to help. Mike and Gail are stunned to see René working such hard hours, questioning if the restaurant owner is pushing her beyond her physical limits. Madame L'Aiguille jokingly threatens to kick the men out for their insolence, drawing a playful and exaggerated, scary, response from the two regulars. Flashing a charming and graceful smile, René greets the men and informs them that she must leave early due to her other responsibilities. Mike and Gail blush intensely as they declare René to be their angel, claiming that her appreciation alone dispels all of their daily weariness. Seizing the perfect opportunity, L'Aiguille-san asks the two men to escort René home safely before they settle down for their evening drinks. The matter is quickly settled as Mike and Gail eagerly agree to the task, and L'Aiguille-san confirms the plan with a satisfied and knowing grin. René expresses her deep gratitude to the men, gracefully accepting their kind offer to protect her on the walk back to her home. As René prepares to depart with her new escorts, a sudden and profound thought crosses her mind, signaling a final moment of realization. René is haunted by a dark, unshakable premonition that warns her of a nearing catastrophe. She understands with chilling certainty that any companions who attempt to shield her will only meet a gruesome death. Masking her terror with a shout of defiance, she insists she will be home in an instant and sprints into the shadows. The heavy wooden door slams as Madame L'Aiguille's desperate plea for her to wait is swallowed by the silence of the night. Brimming with fury and fear, the Madame curses René's reckless bravery while recalling the warnings she so easily ignored. L'Aiguille points toward the darkness, commanding Mike and Gail to snap out of their daze and pursue the fleeing girl. The men's expressions harden as they realize the gravity of the situation and vow to move out immediately. Madame L'Aiguille shudders as a murderous, heavy atmosphere settles over the Green Leaves restaurant like a physical weight. While Kane remains occupied with his own mission, she prays that René's hidden plan will allow her to reach safety in time. The moonlit streets of the capital loom tall and empty, hiding the unseen hunters moving through the brickwork alleys. Her breath coming in ragged gasps, René tells herself she must put as much distance as possible between herself and the restaurant. She reflects on the half-year of blood and sacrifice others have endured to keep her alive while Kane kept the full truth hidden. Visions of poisoned feasts and fallen tasters flash through her mind as she wonders how many lives were spent to detect the Earl's malice. Though an assassin was caught, she agonizes over the count of the injured and the dead left in the wake of this conspiracy. She knows the enemy would not hesitate to slaughter her friends at the restaurant or the magicians caught in the crossfire. The hair on the back of her neck stands up as the distinct, terrifying sensation of being watched ripples through her. Pushing her body to its limit, she focuses every ounce of her will on reaching the sanctuary of the tunnel entrance. René rounds a sharp stone corner, her eyes darting through the darkness as she searches for any sign of her pursuers. A sudden, magical poof shatters the air behind her as a hooded figure manifests out of thin air. The alleyway is instantly choked by a circle of silent, menacing figures draped in heavy dark robes. A sharp grunt of pain escapes Renee as she realizes she has run straight into a perfectly orchestrated trap. The atmosphere thickens with magical tension as the chapter of her flight draws to a violent and sudden close. The rhythmic, heavy step of a leader echoes against the cobblestones as a figure emerges from the circle of robes. A voice dripped in mock formality asks if Queen Loisline would do them the honor of surrendering to their custody. Blood drains from her face as she recognizes the chilling voice as the second man from the palace courtyard. Standing her ground despite the overwhelming odds, the queen delivers a sharp and unwavering refusal to their demands. A sinister, confident smirk plays across the hidden face of the robed commander as he stares down his royal prey. The circle begins to tighten as the kidnappers approach from all sides, cutting off any hope of a quick escape. Renee looks toward her goal with desperation, her heart sinking as she realizes the tunnel entrance is agonizingly close yet unreachable. Hemmed in by the Earl's elite agents, she frantically searches for any way to break through their line. A sudden, violent thwack resounds through the alley as the world begins to tilt and fade for the young queen. In her fading consciousness, she regrets being unable to fulfill her promise to ask Kane about the mysterious Milisama. Back at the restaurant, the exterior remains peaceful and unsuspecting of the tragedy unfolding just blocks away. Liguila's eyes sharpen as she realizes she has a new, far more dangerous task ahead of her this night. She dismisses the mundane kitchen preparations as already finished, her focus shifting entirely to the coming conflict. The madam admits that she can no longer hide behind her role as a simple restaurant owner as she prepares for battle. Her eyes begin to burn with the fierce light of a commander, betraying her past as a high-ranking military officer. Declaring that they must welcome the intruders, she confirms the enemy has already laid hands on the girl. One of the robed figures lifts Renee's limp, unconscious body into his arms, preparing to spirit her away into the night. A narrator's warning blares across the scene, questioning if Mike and Gale can possibly catch up to save the queen. Mike and Gale encounter the hooded figures in the alley, their faces twisting with hatred for the men they've long despised. Mike gazes down the empty corridor, his heart hammering as he realizes the magnitude of what has just occurred. He screams Renee's name into the void, but only the cold wind of the alley answers his cry. Realizing the footprints lead away into the darkness, the men curse their failure to arrive just moments sooner. Mike takes charge, ordering Gale to report the disaster to the commander and the king while he tracks the kidnappers. The finality of the situation strikes them like a blow as the news breaks that the queen of the realm has been kidnapped. The narrative shifts to chapter, teasing a tragic family history shrouded in darkness behind the assassination plot. The grand silhouette of the royal palace stands under the sun, a sharp contrast to the dark events of the previous night. Within the palace walls, officials argue in disbelief, citing Earl Arkan's support of the royal engagement as proof of his innocence. An unidentified man erupts in fury, declaring that the intelligence officer who compiled such a flawed report deserves a wage cut. Examining the reports, the group finds it suspicious that the Earl's attendants, Delta and Lambda, share names with the followers of the God of the Night. A heavy tension fills the workspace as the investigators realize they are dealing with something far more sinister than simple politics. The glint of a magical earring suggests that secret communications are being exchanged behind the palace walls. Returning to the palace, the king demands an immediate report on the findings from his loyal subordinates, Curtis and Abel. Abel steps forward to deliver the grim results of the investigation into Earl Arkan's recent activities. Acting on royal orders, the scouts uncovered several suspicious discrepancies regarding the Earl's behavior and associations. They reveal that Arkance was replaced as the diplomat to Rowan after only 3 years, and his suspicious attendants are indeed known as Delta and Lambda. The short tenure is highly unusual, as diplomatic posts in their kingdom typically last for 5 full years. Upon questioning the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it was revealed that a major, hidden scandal forced the Earl's early recall. It turns out the Earl took his daughter to Rowan in a desperate search for a cure for her terminal illness. Despite donating a fortune to the Temple of Familia, the Saint of Healing could only briefly extend the girl's life rather than save her. Because healing magic only amplifies a patient's natural recovery, it was powerless to help a girl whose very lifespan was already depleted. The Earl's daughter lived a life of isolation due to her condition, leading many to believe he had no children at all. Tragically, she was nearly the same age as the king and was on the verge of making her debut in high society. The king realizes they may have even crossed paths at a royal ball during his time as the crown prince. After her death, the Earl returned to Lubela for the funeral, completely consumed by mental anguish and grief. In his despair, the Earl began to bitterly curse the saints and the very temple that failed to save his child. Given that Rowan is a land of powerful wizards, the diplomat's primary role was to recruit talent and maintain royal ties. Distraught and unstable, Archance could no longer represent the kingdom in such a magic-centric nation and was unceremoniously replaced. Though it was a clear demotion, the minister protected the accomplished Earl by handling the matter as an internal ministry secret. The king laments that if this information had been public, they would have seen the warning signs much sooner. With his motives now clear, Earl Archance immediately moves to the top of their list of primary suspects. 6 months after his arrest, he was stationed in a remote country notably lacking any temples of familia. That specific region served as a secret base of operations for the treasonous Kreutz faction at the time. It is confirmed that Delta and Lambda are actually senior members of the Kreutz faction embedded at the Earl's side. Following the Earl's return to Lubela, the group was secretly plotting the assassination of the Queen. The king realizes with horror that the Kreutz faction has been pulling the strings behind the Earl's mourning all along. He questions why they would target Lois Lane specifically, given the official announcement that she possesses no blessing. They speculate the motive lies in her family's witch heritage or perhaps a deep-seated hatred for Rowan itself. Regardless of the motive, the king prepares to gather more details as the investigation enters its next phase. The king sits in grim silence as the pieces of the puzzle finally click into place. He sternly orders his soldiers to immediately apprehend Earl Archance and his suspicious attendants. A vision of the innocent, smiling Renee provides a sharp contrast to the dark conspiracy unfolding in the capital. The king remains hopeful that Lois Lane is safely returning to the villa through the secret underground passage. The fragile peace is shattered when a guard lunges into the room to report a dire emergency. The group is stunned to learn that Earl Archance has violently forced his way through the East Gate. Using powerful magic to incapacitate the gatekeepers, the Earl made his escape before merchants could sound the alarm. The prince realizes that an open, brazen attack means the enemy has finally decided to show their hand. Panic sets in as the prince screams for Lois Lane's whereabouts, fearing the worst has already happened. Papers fly and the room descends into a whirlwind of activity as the knights prepare for immediate action. Curtis and Abel exchange a knowing, determined look as they realize the true gravity of the Earl's betrayal. Kane bursts into the room with a look of pure desperation on his face. With a cry of despair, Kane reports the devastating news that Renee has been snatched away by the enemy. Though Mike is currently tracking the enemy, he reports that the elite Kreutz faction force was simply too fast to intercept. The king's jaw tightens as he realizes the Kreutz faction has made their move exactly as feared. The king orders a full company to march toward the ruins of the Temple of the God of the Night, 5 kilometers past the gate. The air crackles with magical energy as the pursuit of the kidnappers begins in the shadows of the East Gate. The king calls out to his most trusted knights, Abel and Curtis, preparing for a desperate rescue mission. Knowing they cannot stop their sovereign, the knights urge him to go while they handle the defense of the capital gripping the hilt of his blade. The king gives a final, resolute affirmation as he prepares to ride into the fray. Resolved to bring her back, Sieghard declares his unwavering vow to save Lois Lane from the shadows of the conspiracy. Outside, the city remains deceptively still as the sun begins to set over the timber-framed buildings. Using a magical communication device, Kane reaches out to the landlady, now addressed as Commander, to confirm she can hear him. The commander reports that Mike has just arrived, and they are preparing to move out immediately to intercept the kidnappers. With darkness fast approaching, the group confirms the enemy is indeed heading toward the ruins of the Temple of the God of the Night. Standing at the ready, the soldiers urge Sieghard to give the official order to engage, as they cannot head into battle without his command. Invoking his royal authority, Sieghard formally issues the command to mobilize by the order of the Kingdom of Lubela. With a fierce determination in his eyes, Sieghard shouts the final call to action to his waiting troops. The commander offers a confident smirk as she leads her specialists into the fray, ready to fulfill her duty. Cutting through the tension, Sieghard calls for Unit 8 to deploy at full strength. Clad in cloaks and masks, the elite members of Unit 8 rush forward with incredible speed to begin their assault. Sprinting alongside his companion, Sieghard calls out to Gale that they are joining the charge themselves. As he races toward the temple ruins, Sieghard prays for Loisline's safety while the battle for the kingdom begins.